Little brother has taken control, shoveling dirt in every hole. Predators to condemn your soul, watching you and watching me. We're all connected but separated, misunderstood and so frustrated. A million armies of one have invaded, watching you and watching me. We live behind glass curtains and act like nothing's wrong. Soon you will belong. I know you're out there somewhere. We've watched you for so long. Wait for you to fall. We'll expose you all. I know you're out there somewhere watching me. The little brother wants to make headlines, be immortalized. Everyone's got an electric eye, we're the digital spies. They've watched you for so long. I know you're out there somewhere watching me. We the people have taken over. We the people are little brother, standing by to dethrone each other, watching you and watching me. Paranoid, the lens is our weapon, desensitized in our lust for attention, democratized by our voyeur obsessions, watching you and watching me. Slaves to perfection, don't let them project you as you are. Feel your every flaw. I know you're out there somewhere. We've watched you for so long. Wait for you to fall. We'll expose you all. I know you're out there somewhere watching me. Little brother wants to make headlines, be immortalized. Everyone's got an electric eye, we're the digital spies. They've watched you for so long. I know you're out there somewhere watching me. I know you're out there somewhere. This is the new totalitarian state. 1,000 eyes are waiting for you to break. Stay in line, don't make a mistake. We're watching. We watched you for so long. We wait for you to fall. We will expose you all. I know you're out there somewhere watching me.
Let your experience begin right now. From high atop the mountains of British Columbia to you listening around the world, this is Spaced Out Radio. You can follow us on our website, spacedoutradio.com, on Twitter, @SpacedOutRadio. Give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. You can follow us on Instagram, Dave Scott, SOR, or on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. Buckle up, space travelers. It's time to go for a ride as we are live on Spaced Out Radio.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
The deeper I go, the deeper I fall.
All right, hold on. Good evening and welcome to Spaced Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott. Good to have you along for the ride as we welcome you along on this great planet we call Earth. Yes, we are going live in Uncle Jimbo's cabin right here in the Great White North on this Friday night, early Saturday morning. If you're on the East Coast, thank you for taking the time. We really do appreciate it. Let's welcome in everyone listening in SpaceOutRadio.com, on Spreaker, on the United Public Radio Network, the High Plains Talk Radio Network, and on Revolution Radio as we do this thing every night of the week. Rocking out as well to our resident guitar god, Mr. Ron Bumblefoot THAL, formerly of Guns N' Roses. Bumblefoot is the official sound of SOR. Also, you can check us out on Twitter @SpacedOutRadio. Give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. On Instagram, I can be followed at Dave Scott SOR. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. Tune us in on TuneIn. Download our shows from iTunes, and our website is spacedoutradio.com. If you want to take part in the show, you will have to sign into one of our chat rooms on Revolution Radio, on Spreaker, and on Facebook at the SOR Space Travelers Club. On our website, if you haven't signed up for the SOR Space Travelers Club yet, you gotta. It's only $5 a month, and with that, your name gets entered into monthly prize draws. You get access to private group interviews, access to a special section on our website, and so much more. Hey, we're going to give you a hell of a lot more than just access to our archives. While on our website, you can read up on my latest blog, check out Eric Markham's SOR Spacewire for your latest and weird news, and if you've had an experience you can't explain, just head to our website, fill out a Sightlines report. Our researcher Mike Schmidt is ready to find out what's going on. All personal information is 100% confidential. We want to thank everyone listening in on our new affiliate, the United Public Radio Network on 107.7 FM in New Orleans, and their listeners from over 160 countries around the world. Thank you for being part of Spaced Out Radio and letting us into your living room. Remember, if you're on Revolution Radio and you're listening in, it is the largest non-profit online radio station going today. Do us a favor, visit freedomslips.com and donate today. On July 8th, 1947, the biggest cover-up of its time happened. It's an incident so popular that whether or not you're a believer in life up in the stars, everyone has heard of the UFO crash in Corona that has become well known as the Roswell incident. During that time, the Roswell Army Airfield actually released a statement to the press stating a flying disc had crashed on a ranch during a powerful storm. However, later that day, the military quickly retracted that statement and changed it to a crashed secret military weather balloon. Yet the eyewitnesses were all told to keep quiet. Some even threatened with a life in prison or death if they spoke a word of what truly happened. Now, let's open your mind a little bit more. What if there were two crash sites? What if a second spacecraft went down that day? For some reason, ufologists either refuse to talk about or even research a second crash theory. Can we call it a theory? No. No, we can't, because in San Augustin, New Mexico, there was a second crash with debris and even strange little humanoid bodies around the craft. 2 dead, 1 wounded, 1 alive. Gerald Anderson is the sole set of eyes still alive who witnessed that crash site. San Augustin researchers joining us tonight include Renee Carkin. She will be here in about half an hour's time. Steve Colbern from California, along with 50 Shades of Grey UFOs. 50 Shades of UFOs. Pardon me. Let me get that again. I typed it wrong, Ray. I apologize. Along with 50 Shades of Grey's UFO author, Ray Szymanski. I swear, it seems so smooth coming out of my head. So, what actually happened in San Augustine, and why is it covered up so well when Roswell is so popular? We bring in Steve and Ray right now to Spaced Out Radio. Gentlemen, welcome.
Welcome.
Hey, how's it going?
Well, but it was going fine until apparently I butchered my own intro there, my friend. I butchered it. My goodness. You know, on live radio, you just don't want those type of boo-boos to happen, and, well, it happened. Anyways, doesn't matter. We'll move on. You know what? I have to tell you guys, a year and a half ago when I had Gerald Anderson on this show, it was the first interview he had done in 22 years because he was tired of the roasting that he was getting in the UFO community and from people around him. They thought he was a whack job, a kook. How could somebody at 5 years old remember everything like that? And the way I looked at it and the way Gerald explained it before I'd even talked to him, I looked at it this way. If you have something traumatic happen to you, let's say you're a young child and you witness your mother or father beaten up, or worse, maybe even murdered, you're going to remember what happened. The memory is still there. You're not going to forget something that is so life-altering that it's just going to become a so-called figment of the imagination, much like Stanton Friedman does not believe Gerald Anderson. But I have to tell you, gentlemen, I'm a firm believer in Gerald's story. And from the people whom I have talked to, have close to it, his story has not changed in 50-plus years, coming on 60 years, or pardon me, 70 years now. So, Ray, I would love it if you could take some time here to maybe go over what happened at San Augustine.
Well, let me start out with the controversy and rebut a statement which you just made, and that was that Stanton Friedman does not believe Gerald Anderson. In February of this year, I was fortunate enough to share a table at the International UFO Congress with my friend Yvonne Smith. And as such, since Yvonne is such a prominent member of the community, her table was positioned precisely next to that of Stanton Friedman. So I had an entire week to sit next to Stanton Friedman as I sold my book. It was the very first time it went public. It had just been published a couple weeks beforehand. And there's some downtime in between, and I didn't spend, the entire 4.5 days sitting there selling the book, but I had a chance to, sit down next to Stanton, and I discussed with him the Gerald Anderson situation. And I asked him point blank, I said, Stanton, I need to know what your current position is on Gerald Anderson and whether or not he was at the plains of San Augustine and saw what he claims he saw. And without hesitation, Stanton said, and I'll try to quote it as closely as I can remember it. Stanton said, Gerald was there. He really upset me with this phone bill business. But there is no doubt in my mind that that Gerald's story is as he told it. So even though Stanton first, he had interviewed Gerald and he had taped him and he had paid for a lie detector test, which Gerald passed with flying colors, and Stanton wrote about him in his book. Then, there was some Mickey Mouse games going on where Gerald was trying to exact some revenge on an unscrupulous investigator, and it blew up in his face, and then Stanton lost, Stanton lost faith in him. But it turns out that after all this time, Stanton Friedman, I'll quote him, he said, Gerald was there. His story is basically as Gerald has told it. So, things are strange. 20 years after the fact, Stanton basically admitted to me that he believes Gerald's story. So, what is his story? The story is that Gerald was with his father, his uncle, and a cousin. They were out on the plains of San Augustin rock hounding. They came across a crashed craft in the side of a hill. They saw aliens. At least one of them was injured. One was dead. I guess one was alive. And then shortly thereafter, a archaeological group that was there had come by, and they had seen the light of the crash the night before. They set out early in the morning. They hooked up with Gerald and his group. And, somewhere in the mix, Barney Barnett gets thrown in, and Gerald, I'm not really sure, knew if it was Barney or not, but he thought it was some government worker. So that was his story. Hey, we saw it, we touched the craft, we saw the aliens, and I was there, you weren't. And fast forward to like 2011, Art Campbell, Chuck Wade and company are out on the plains, and they've been doing an archaeological dig and recovery of small bits of metal since about 1997, and with minimal success. They invite Gerald out there, and he said, hey, boys, why don't we bring a metal detector? He looks at where they're actually doing their dig and says, you're about 100 yards off. And he walks them over to another area, gets out the metal detector, and then suddenly this thing is singing like a witness, chirping, and they wound up digging out the mother lode. And only because Gerald knew where the exact crash site was, and they could then estimate from there, what path the craft took as it came in. And without Gerald's help, Art Campbell and Chuck Wade will tell you they never would have found the mother lode that they did in 2011. And that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Steve, I bring you into the show, and thank you so much for taking part in this, because you're someone who has actually investigated the metal pieces that were found. We're going to get into that later on in the show. But why do you think, looking back on history, San Augustin is the forgotten crash site, whereas Roswell, 70 years later, still seems so sexy?
I'm really not sure. I mean, it seems logical to me that if one craft crashed in Roswell, then another craft could have crashed at San Augustine at about the same time. But certain people seem to have a lot of money and time and career invested in the Roswell crash site, and seem to want to crowd out or shout down anybody that said anything different, that anything else crashed about that same time in New Mexico.
Do you think it's a real disservice to the field of ufology, Steve, because here we have this amazing double crash site, and yet only one of them is talked about. Only one is perceived to be the real thing, and the other one still, to most ufologists, is absolutely non-existent. Even when the television shows go down and do their documentaries, they don't even travel the 150, 200 miles in distance to go to San Augustine to see what happened there. They don't even bring it up.
Yes, I think it is a huge disservice to the UFO community and science in general to basically write this crash site out of history. Science is supposed to be a field where we go where the evidence leads us, and that's certainly not the case here. Politics and God knows what other factors are at work here, but not science. There's a lot of people here that are not scientists, that are claiming to be too, that are, in my opinion, muddying the waters, and that should not be allowed.
Please define what you mean by muddying the waters.
Well, there's a certain person that's always lecturing about Roswell. I'm not going to mention his name, but he at one point claimed to be a PhD scientist and was in reality a former mailman. I can't help but think that the government put him up to coming out and talking about this to muddy the water somehow. Perhaps one of his purposes was to concentrate all efforts on the one crash site that had already been thoroughly investigated and debunk any others.
Ray, that brings up a very good point about a government cover-up. It's easy to cover up one, but if you admit there's a second one, it gets a hell of a lot more difficult in order to try and stifle any public knowledge whatsoever on this site. Would you agree with that theory?
Well, the idea of a cover-up, to me, is one that I can easily accept. And if you look at crashed test aircraft that the Air Force has had to recover in past years, and the stories, they'll have, let's just say, a 117 crashes for the first time, and they don't want to let the cat out of the bag, so they tell the people who've noticed the craft, and this is actually a true story for maybe not the 117, but another experimental craft, where they said, hey, it had a nuclear bomb on it, and everyone needs to, evacuate the closest 50 miles, because if this thing goes off, you're dead. So they go in there and they recover everything, and quite frankly, they don't get it all, so they just plow it under. So if you think about it, the same thing is possible with the plains of San Augustin. They have a team that's used to recovering crashed test craft, and they say, hey, this thing happened, so let's go in and pick it as clean as we can and then bulldoze the rest. And that's kind of the place where Art Campbell and Chuck Wade found it. It looked like a lot of the stuff had just been bulldozed into the ground. So, yeah, there's a cover-up, but they just can't seem to get everything. They can't pick 100% of it from the ground.
Well, the way Gerald had explained on this show a year ago was that it seemed like because there were two crash sites going on, the military really wanted to get in and out of that site as quickly as possible. And Art Campbell, when we had him on the air before Gerald, he even concurred with this by saying, you know what, it's like they just went in there, grabbed what they could. They didn't bother looking for anything that was deep or underground or broken off. They just took what they can and got out of there like nothing ever happened. And is that pretty much what you've been told as well, Ray?
Well, I don't think I've been told that directly, but, I've done a lot of reading on it, and I was reading a very interesting dialogue out on the web the other day, and it was a back and forth between a guy by the name of Antonio Paris, and he'll come back into the conversation later. He's a former MUFON guy who has his own aerial phenomena investigation group, and they basically debunked the plains of San Augustin material, but the way they did it was basically, attacking the messenger. They never really had any counter evidence. And in this blog, there was a gentleman who introduced himself as being part of the recovery team, and he went through all of the shortcomings that the recovery team normally encountered, and that was that they didn't get everything, and they never could get everything. It was just an impossible task. It blew up in the air, and it scattered over miles, so fragments were going to be, basically put everywhere. So, they have recovery teams, but, they're not perfect.
Let's go back to July 8th, 1947, Steve. What do you think happened that night?
I think that a formation of UFOs was probably flying around the White Sands Missile Base and basically spying on the government, and there was a violent electrical storm, and I think that one or more of them got hit by lightning, and a couple of them crashed. One near White Sands, near Corona, New Mexico, and the other about 200 miles to the west.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to weigh in on that.
Please do.
If you think about it, at that time, the most powerful radars on the planet were at White Sands Missile Range. And the direction from which the crafts were coming and were observed that night around Roswell was they were coming from the southwest. And that means that the craft would have to have passed just about over White Sands missile range prior to getting to the Roswell area. If you think about it, these craft might be traveling 1,000 miles an hour, 2,000 miles an hour. And let's just say that their navigation gear got a 2 or 3 second blackout because they passed over these very powerful radars, which perhaps they weren't, their nav systems weren't designed to ignore. And so maybe their nav system had a 2 or 3 second blackout. Well, if you think about it, 2 or 3 seconds at 2,000 miles an hour leaves you open to a lot of bad possibilities. And one of those is that I don't have nav for a couple of seconds, and two craft hit each other. I have the, immovable object hitting the unstoppable force. And what happens is they're both going to get damaged. One, travels on and falls at Corona, 70 miles north of Roswell, and the other one kind of pings off the first, stays afloat for, another, who knows what, 5 or 6 seconds or, 30 seconds, and winds up 225 miles away on the plains of San Augustin. It's not a scenario that's impossible should the navigation systems on those craft have gone out for just a couple of seconds.
Do you think lightning was a factor in that, Ray?
It could have been. But my money would be on the radio energy off of the radar systems at White Sands or, somewhere else in that area. Lightning to me is just kind of random, and I just think it's the other. I think maybe we had some interference with their nav system, and it brought the ships down because they bumped into each other.
That could be. I mean, they've known how to bring craft down by radar since the 1950s, and they could have brought the craft down by powerful radar as well. It's hard to say, but Corso in his book said that they used to bring UFOs down by that means, and or would at least disable them to the extent that a missile might be able to hit it. So that definitely could be a factor in the crash. It's one or the other, is either lightning or the radar.
Yeah, it's not as if, the radar waves blew a hole in the craft. I just think it interfered with some function on their craft, and, that caused an accident. And, you've got
Instead
two
of being able
very...
to maneuver at 100 Gs or more, they can maneuver at maybe, 2 or 3 Gs if they have a powerful radar trained on them, according to Corso's book, and I think he was telling the truth.
Yeah, it's okay. Corso said a lot of things, but, if I'm just thinking, the Occam's razor, the simplest explanation is probably, the most likely. It's not that they use radar as a weapon. It just happened to interfere. And, if you get two electronic devices too close to each other and they interfere, then, they're going to be rendered somewhat useless. And I just think that the nav system interference just, to me, seems the more logical.
Well, they definitely can use it as a weapon, but whether they did in this case or not, we'll never know.
Absolutely. Can either one of you, and Steve, maybe I'll start with you on this one, describe what the plains of San Augustin look like?
Well, I went out there back in early 2013, spring of 2013, and it had grass growing about 6 feet high, and sunflowers are growing about 2 feet higher than that. They just had the wettest year in history in the previous winter, and I thought we had about a snowball's chance, and where, of finding any more metal fragments under those conditions. And indeed, we didn't find anything, but it was a big shock to this area that was thought of as desert was, indeed sprouting with all kinds of plant life.
It's very desolate there, though. There's not a lot of people running around. Maybe ATVers,
No.
the odd campers or hikers.
No, not a lot of people at all. But
if you look at the photo,
dry when I was out there.
Ray?
If you look at the photographs in Art Campbell's book, Finding the UFO Crash at San Augustin, it's clearly high desert area. There's not a lot of scrub brush out there. And, I'm looking across the plains and it looks almost vacant of vegetation. So I think Steve might have been out there in a very unusual circumstance. Like you said, it was record-breaking rains.
I mean, this was the most vegetation that had been out there in probably 40 years, according to people that live there.
Now, this is...
so pretty much...
Go ahead.
No. Please go.
This is Navajo area. And the Navajo have been known to see a lot of strange things in the New Mexico skies over the years. And, of course, if you go a little bit further, that leads to the whole Hopi Indians. And there's a lot of strange things that happens in New Mexico, even to this day. Have anybody ever interviewed any of the Navajo in regards to this situation?
I think Chuck Wade did.
Well,
I don't know the details, but I think he did. He had a couple of Navajo diggers out at the site at one point.
Mm-hmm. Did any of them, as far as you know, Steve, talk about seeing the crash when it happened?
No.
Wow. So what happens is, and from my best estimation, is we have the two UFOs, they collide, one immediately goes down in San Augustin, the next one crawls over towards Corona, crashes there. Let's go to the crash site of what Gerald saw, because they were out agate hunting that day. Gerald, his father, his uncle, his brother, and his cousin. And I believe his brother was on military leave or had just got out of basic training or something along those lines. And they come across this ridge and they see something kind of shining and they go looking up to it. When you hear Gerald speak about what it was like with that craft, what it looked like, Ray, could you please describe that for our audience?
Well, I've had the pleasure of a number of long hour-plus conversations with Gerald. And it's pretty much the way he described it on your show. It's almost spooky because listening to what he told you on the show and then talking to him on the telephone is almost like he's replaying it word for word. So they come across this craft. There's a giant gash in it, and they find a live alien sitting outside. There's a dead alien out there, and there's one that is severely injured. And they peek around, trying to look inside the craft, and they don't really get to spend too much time because suddenly the archaeologist group shows up, and then shortly thereafter the military shows up and starts barking orders. So if I recall, it was supposed to be around a 30-foot tall craft, maybe 8 foot tall. But when they came upon it, it was embedded into the side of a small hill, and there was a gash in it. And I think he surmised that the gash was not caused by hitting the ground, but rather something that might have happened in the midair.
Mm-hmm. I remember, Ray, that him saying that there was metal all around, and even though his dad had told him not to touch the metal, he did. And yet, even in that 100-degree heat, the metal from the spaceship was actually quite cool and cold, like it was not heating up from the sun's rays, which seems impossible for metal, especially in 100-degree weather.
Absolutely, and that's what I recall also, that he said it was very unusual for it to have that kind of a touch, because if you've been out in the desert and you left your car out there for 5 minutes and you touch any of the chrome trim, for example, you're going to find out that it's not going to feel like a refrigerant.
No.
So yeah, indeed, that's very, very unusual.
Do you find that quite strange, Steve, as someone who looks into this type of phenomena?
The samples, according to all accounts, were quite thin, so they would not feel as hot as a bulk piece of metal under those conditions. But from the description, it did seem like they were not as hot as to the touch as one would normally expect.
It's still strange to a lot of people, and I'm looking at this post that was put in the SOR Space Travelers Club. It's a meme that basically reads, UFO can fly in space and into other solar systems, gets into a small storm, and crashes. Like, it just seems so phenomenal that this even took place, even with the combination of the heavy radar over New Mexico and the lightning storm of all things. I mean, their technology, you would expect it to be so much higher that it would have been able to evade this type of situation. And we can't blame man because it's not man-made.
Yeah,
I'm asked that question.
That's a valid point, but at the same time, there's no storms or radar in space that we know of, so perhaps they just did not design the craft to withstand that.
I'm asked this all the time when I make a public presentation. If they're so advanced, how come they're always crashing? Well, space and our atmosphere are two different things, like Steve just mentioned. Your frictions down here are so much different. The way that your ship has to deal with gravity and atmospheric conditions and rain and things that you're not going to find in space, it's very, very different. So the fact that they didn't know we had radar could be a contributing factor. Again, it doesn't take much of a disturbance in your normal flight profile at 2,000 miles an hour to create a disaster. And all you need was, maybe they had some self-correcting software hardware on board that detected it, but by the time, the 5-second blackout was over, they'd already crashed into a craft that was experiencing a very similar phenomena.
Whatever deficiencies they had back then, I think they've corrected them because we haven't heard of any crashes lately. Very few, anyway.
Gentlemen, you're going to hear a little bit of a ringtone. I'm going to try and bring in Renee Carkin at this time because we're at the bottom of the hour.
No routes found.
Apparently, her line is not working. I'll try that one again. I don't know what no routes found means. I've never heard that one before. That's new for me. That's new. Hold on 1 second here, gentlemen. Let's try this again. Nope. I will try her in just a little bit. But let's continue on here for a minute here, because there's a lot of people who wonder then, when the government went in and the military went in and they swept up that site. Steve, to your best knowledge, where did that craft go and where possibly is it today?
I think they took it to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, and they didn't do a very good job of cleaning the site up compared to Roswell, and they just, to my understanding, bulldozed the remainder of it into a pile of dirt and thought nobody would bother to try to dig it up, and they were wrong about that. But they learned from that experience and cleaned the Roswell crash site up a lot better, and used people side by side to clean up every piece bigger than about a centimeter or so in largest diameter, largest dimension.
And Ray, what about the aliens? Did they go to Wright-Patterson too? Is this one of the famous J-rods that we have been hearing about that were helping back engineer aircraft that were coming down at Area 51?
Let me first chime in on the cleanups. If you think about Roswell, they had a large workforce that they could readily commute out, in 90 minutes or so to get to the Roswell crash site. And so they have all kinds of bodies they could recruit and go, hey, we're going to pick up stuff on this field, for the next week, and that's great. The same didn't happen on the planes. There was no readily available large conscripted workforce that they could do the same type of cleanup that they could at Roswell. And that would explain why you're finding so much more debris in the plains than you did at Roswell. It's just, they just didn't have the same workforce to do the same cleanup as they did in Roswell. And go on to the aliens, my thoughts are that, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in 1947 was the center of the aerospace world. They had everything they could possibly need to do an investigation on crashed craft or their occupants. They had the physical space. They had people with clearances who knew how to keep their mouths shut. They had money. They had contractual vehicles. They had all the scientific expertise they need. And if they didn't have the right scientific expertise, they could contract them. They could do a time and materials or, however they did it in 1947. They had vaults. They had, hangars and plenty of physical space to house this stuff in. So all that said, Wright-Patterson at that time would have been the logical place to bring everything, at least for an initial analysis, to determine what to do with it next. And what that was, I'm not exactly sure. I guess, you have to read several books to find out. But there is no doubt in my mind that Wright-Patterson Air Force Base was perfectly positioned to be the place to do at least the initial analysis of everything that has been recovered. And they are to this day.
What's Area 51's play in this whole thing?
Well, if you follow the mythology, supposedly it's a place where it's more difficult to get into, more difficult for the casual observer to see anything. They have higher clearances for little pockets there. And they, have more money. It's more black budget, where Wright-Patterson's money is more, white budget, which is susceptible to, congressional oversight. And so with all the black budget money, you can buy machines and devices and test equipment that might give you a clue as to what they're doing. At Wright-Patterson, it's all accountable. At Area 51, maybe not so much. So those other activities could definitely be buried along with other black activities. So Area 51 may have been the place where they set up shop to do the advanced exploitation of the materials and the occupants.
We're going to try and get Renee in here again. So let's try and, I think I got it figured out this time. We're going to hear a ringtone. There we go. Hopefully she answers. It's always this suspense that's built on the radio. There she is.
Hello.
We have Renee Carkin on Spaced Out Radio now. Hi, Renee.
Hi, folks. How are you?
Excellent.
Hey, Renee.
We are live, and we have Ray and Steve with us tonight. We could not get a hold of Rob Mercer, so we are just rolling with it. Now, Renee Carkin is someone, ladies and gentlemen, who was on the main investigative team back in 2011. She knows Gerald Anderson very well, has confirmed his stories, has read and seen the lie detector test that Gerald has passed on a number of occasions. Renee, are you still surprised, and I asked this of Ray and Steve earlier, are you still surprised that so few actually know and recognize what San Augustin is all about in the field of ufology?
Well, I'm not really surprised at any of that. The cover-up is alive and well. It is just not meant to be out in the public. And I have been listening to the program, and I have a few comments, and I don't know if they're necessarily corrections, but shall we say amplifications of things that you've said already. Recently, or if anybody has been to the UFO Museum in Roswell, you will see an artist's rendition of the craft that was allegedly taken to Wright-Patterson, and it has a big gash in it. And that's where Gerald got the idea that there must have been a collision of two crafts, because He said that is exactly what the craft on the planes looked like. Well, Art Campbell, who has done a lot of interesting research, and actually he's the one that's put more in writing than anybody else involved with the planes, his theory, or his recent thing, is that the craft, that the debris that the rancher Mac Brazel found, the debris on the sheep ranch, was actually where the crafts, the two crafts collided, if they collided, and the one with the creatures that ended up going to Wright-Patterson was actually the one that fell on the plains of San Augustin. But yet that there's a story that a few days later, the craft was seen under a big tarp riding right through the streets of Roswell. Then there's also the theory that the craft from the plains of San Augustine, I mean, if you read a lot of the different books, there are so many different conflicting stories about where the craft actually took off from, and I think it was probably the Roswell Air Force Base. But again, Art Campbell, more recently in the last few months, seems to think that he came across some information that said it was brought from the plains of San Augustine and it took off from Alamogordo to Wright-Patterson. So there are just so many conflicting stories. But you folks talked about the date of July 8th, and actually the Anderson family was there the night of July 3rd, and it was at 11 o'clock at night that they saw what they thought was a shooting star. And the father was excited. He said, I think we're going to be getting more than Moss Agate. And the next morning, by the time they got over to where they had figured the crash had taken place, they were going to find meteorite rock, is when they came across the craft. And that was on the morning of July 4th. It was on July 8th, I believe that was the date that Mac Brazel brought debris into Roswell. I think there's a lot of back and forth, crisscross of facts between the planes and the Roswell event. Now, I do believe there might have been a second craft that Mac Brazel had actually seen the creatures, because when he went to the radio station, he had said to the guy that interviewed him that they were gray, not green. So unless he had actually seen the creatures, but again, there are 3 allegedly different sites in Roswell. The thing that's distressing to me is that after 5 years that I have been on the periphery of this, meeting people, going to a few of the conventions, it's in the last 5 years, a few people have died. Walter Haught's daughter died of cancer, I understand, 1.5 years ago. Jesse Marcel's son, Dr. Marcel, talk about synchronicity. He died the same weekend that Steve and I were on the planes. And Steve, it wasn't in the spring of 2013. It was the last weekend of August 2013 that we were there. And I'm laughing when he said that, because here it is only 3 years since Steve and I have been out on the planes together with our group, when everything was so overgrown. And yet Steve, in only 3 years, has put it back as to having been in the spring. Well, guess what, guys? We are now 70.
I'm terrible with time. I mean, anybody will tell you that.
Well, I know, but this is just an example. It's not a criticism of you. It's the idea that after 70 years, it's just 3 years since you and I were out there. Think of all the forgetting of the memory, the jumbling of the facts, the misinformation, the disinformation, and then throw in some people that are government agents that are trying to muddy the waters, trying to hide stuff from the public, and you mix all that, and it's like, wow. And the thing that just blows me away is that Gerald Anderson is the last living admitted witness prime witness to the Roswell era events, and yet you still have people like Stanton Friedman and all the other researchers and authors. They just want to pretend he doesn't exist. It's like they want him to go away and just let this fade into oblivion. And that, as a person that's only taken a recent interest in this in the last 5 years, that's what blows my mind. Absolutely blows my mind.
It bothers them that we may have more evidence for this crash than they have for theirs. I'm not sure why that is. I mean, science should not be like that, but it is. I mean, we
there's a lot of money.
The fact that it is like that, so yeah, a lot of money.
It's about money. It's about money in their books. And I had even said to Stanton Friedman in a couple emails, I said, you guys shouldn't be afraid of disclosure. You shouldn't be afraid of sticking your necks out. I mean, unless they've gotten death threats for their family for generations in perpetuity. And I think that there's a lot of that kind of thing. I mean, you look at the recent presidential election and you see all the drama and intrigue that has gone on politically. And I think people are becoming very aware of, the secret government and shadow governments. Well, I think it's the same with the UFO phenomena. You have the people who are just trying to cash in on it. You go to any of these UFO conferences, the big deal is the cost of the conferences. And then in the rooms where you buy the books, it's all about money. And I had said to Stan, I said, man, if you had disclosure, I said, it wouldn't be the end of an era. It would be the beginning of new books and new authors. And I mean, they'd still be making money. So that's why, and I don't believe that national security thing anymore. That's lame.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Steve, tell them about your metals analysis.
Well, the strength of the materials was not that remarkable, but one thing that really struck me as strange was the concentrations of rare earths in the aluminum and all the other trace elements: copper, uranium, thorium, and zinc, and it definitely didn't seem like aluminum foil, like certain MUFON people said. And we also had some possible isotopic discrepancies between terrestrial and the values of the samples. So it very well could have been of extraterrestrial origin. But in order to really do that right, we'd have to have a lot more funding and do tests from a couple of their labs. But there's enough material here to definitely do some more, to warrant doing some more investigation.
Yeah, and there's plenty of the material in possession of Chuck Wade up in Gallup, New Mexico, and we'd all love us to find, it's definitely probably not a government-connected group, but an intimate, independent group that would like to, sink their teeth into this to prove that this stuff is off-planet.
Yeah, the amount of material is not a factor in the analysis. I mean, we have more than enough material. Chuck Wade probably has several pounds of the different samples, some more than others. More research needs to be done. One thing that I wanted to mention on the show that has not been published so far is that in the last the trip before the last time we went out there, Chuck Wade and Art Campbell found some material that was on the W6 sample that was like a layer on top of the W6 sample that had brown dots in it, an array of brown dots that turned out to be a mixture of dysprosium and terbium oxides. And those in aerospace, those oxides in aerospace are used to make mechanical actuators that will make a mechanical motion upon being stimulated by an electrical force, and I think that could have been a part of the UFO's drive system. Dysprosium especially is an extremely rare earth element that's very hard to come by on Earth.
That was the part that was connected to the honeycomb material, is that correct?
Yes, that's true. The brown dots were
Steve,
like a layer between the honeycomb material and sample W6, as I recall.
Steve, I think you're underplaying the significance of the results that you received. If we could go back to the original body coat stuff and then the second lab that you used, and could you compare and contrast the type of testing that was done and the, we'll call them positive results for the extraterrestrial case that were the conclusion that you could draw from each of those testing groups?
Well, I calculated the isotopic abundances of several elements from the raw data of the first 6 samples, and got the isotopic ratios on several elements, including magnesium and copper and nickel, were quite skewed from terrestrial values, and that got me really excited. And so I had the test redone with a different lab several months later, and found out that there were indeed discrepancies on copper and nickel, particularly from terrestrial values, but they were not as great as the first test, but still enough to warrant some further investigation for sure.
But in the first case, they were calculated values, and in the second case, they were basically a direct reading. Is that correct?
That's correct. And the second case, it was a different lab, and the lab actually guaranteed the results and was doing a specific test for isotopic ratios.
And I bring that up because there's a third report. A UFO group had tested a piece of the W1 sample, which you also tested, and it turns out that their results indicate that they're terrestrial. But the problem with that report is that they had one individual actually do the testing that was supposedly not associated with the UFO group, and then they took the results and they interpreted the results and created a report. So I don't really know if the UFO group reported the real results that they got or just reported results that were convenient, for whatever kind of case they were trying to build. And do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I read the report, and it struck me as being a total whitewash, just to be blunt about it. I'm not sure what their motivations are, but it just seems like their goal was to downplay my results, which was ironic because the ICP-MS results that I had commissioned in the first report were 10 times as accurate as theirs, and they were depicting their results as more accurate than mine. So I don't get it. I mean, I think that it's some political whitewash to have going on or trying to go on. I go where the data leads me. I mean, I just don't subscribe to these sorts of whitewashes or
well, they're not using across the board. Then they're not using across the board testing. It wasn't a line by item secondary analysis. And I think, Steve, you would also mention that they didn't even use an electron microscope.
No. The protocol
go into that
on possible alien samples is to do light microscopy at various magnifications, then following that by electron microscopy at various magnifications up to the highest magnification doable with that sample. EDX, which you take at the same time as the electron microscopy, point and shoot and mapping to find out the distribution of elements in the sample, and then you got a piece out of it and send that out for ICP-MS.
I'm going to cut you off right there, Steve, because we are literally about 20 seconds away from going to our first break of the night. I just want to remind people we are talking to Renee Carkin, Ray Szymanski, and Steve Colbern. We're talking San Augustine crash here on Spaced Out Radio. We'll be right back right after this.
Looking for news beyond the mainstream news? Head to spacedoutradio.com and check out the SOR Spacewire. This is Spaced Out Radio's Eric Markham, news director for the SOR Spacewire. Daily, I will bring you intriguing stories and outlandish reports from what's going on around the world. UFO sightings, paranormal activity, conspiracies, alternative health, and so much more. And if you have news, email me at news@spacedoutradio.com.
Hi there, I'm Butch Witkowski, lead investigator with U4Cop. On the final Monday of every month, you can listen to me and host Dave Scott on Spaced Out Radio's Strange Days. We're going to get to the heart of the matter when it comes to what's happening out there. People are seeing and experiencing things from ET contact to Bigfoot, and I want to hear about it. Your experiences are what we investigators need to help solve these unknown mysteries, so tune in at spacedoutradio.com.
Have you had an experience you can't explain? Had a run-in with ghosts, maybe Bigfoot, or seen lights in the sky? Hi, I'm Mike Schmidt from the SOR Sightlines. I'm here to investigate your sighting. Head to spacedoutradio.com and fill out a report on the Sightlines. All your information is 100% confidential, and I will help you figure out what you've been seeing. File your report, and let's find out the answers together.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. With their money-back guarantee and the many benefits, how can you afford not to get one? Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com for mind, body, and spirit, and expect a miracle.
Strange creatures lurking in the night, the sounds of wood knocking in the forest, odd happenings right out of a fictional world. These are the reports I love. Hi there, this is author Ronald Murphy, and I would love it if you join me and Spaced Out Radio host Dave Scott the second Wednesday of every month on our journey into the unknown land of cryptozoology at spacedoutradio.com. From Mothman to Frogman and everything in between. Hey, they don't call me the crypto guru for nothing.
Are you interested in advertising on Spaced Out Radio? Head to our website at spacedoutradio.com and click on our advertising tab. There, you will find an assortment of ways you can get your product out there with us, from radio commercials to banners and social media. Have a product you like our hosts to endorse? We can do that too. Visit spacedoutradio.com for more details.
From British Columbia to Northern California, Pacific North Weird has Cascadia covered. Check out our feature videos at spacedoutradio.com, where I, Vincent Zunza, and my super sleuth partner Alexandra Sullivan track down the weird and strange stories from around the Pacific Northwest, from Bigfoot to Mel's Hole and everything in between. This is what makes life exciting. So why report the normal when we can report the Pacific North Weird right here at spacedoutradio.com.
Oh, there's only one way to rock. Loud and proud. In high definition. Radio 702 rocks. Las Vegas.
Have you ever had an extraterrestrial experience? One you just couldn't explain? Well, maybe I can help. Hello, I am Samantha Mullet. On the second Tuesday of each month, I will join Dave Scott on Spaced Out Radio to bring a human aspect to ET contact. It's something I've lived with my entire life, and I'd love to help you understand. Let's share our experiences. The ET Experience, the second Tuesday of each month, only on Spaced Out Radio.
Hi there, this is Jolene with Rivulet Reiki and Readings, and I want you to relax. Let me help you chill out and get in touch with your body, mind, and soul. In this busy world, sometimes we need to let go, and this is where I can help. Visit my website, rivuletrr.wix.com/rivuletrr&r.
Every Saturday and Sunday night, as Dave Scott wanders aimlessly in the wilderness. You can come hang out with me, James Tyson, and Spaced Out Weekend. Starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, I'll take you along as we talk with some of the best experts in their fields. SpacedOutRadio.com is the place to find us. So sit down, relax, put your feet up. Enjoy the topics like the paranormal, supernatural, intuitiveness, and so much more. Hope to see you there.
Hi there, this is your psychic medium, Joanna, and I would love it if you would join us every other Sunday on Spaced Out Weekend. With host James Tyson, we'll bring you personal psychic messages on two mediums and a large. Questions about love, life, career changes. We would love it if you would come and join us live. Call in and listen in for the experience. Allow us to open the doors to your other side. Two mediums and a large, heard only on Spaced Out Weekend at spacedoutradio.com.
Would you like to become one of our space travelers? All you have to do is click on the Space Travelers icon at spacedoutradio.com. For only $5 a month, you can get access to some great prizes, as well as private monthly shows, newsletters, and a members-only section on our website. Become a space traveler today.
Do you have a topic or a guest that you'd like to hear on Spaced Out Radio? Let us know at spacedoutradio.com, where you can sign up to become a Space Traveler member today. Or you can find us on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and on our Facebook page, Spaced Out Radio Show. Welcome back to Spaced Out Radio tonight. Quick hour number 1 through the books. We are into hour number 2 right now on the mighty SOR. There will be no show tomorrow night on Spaced Out Weekend. That's because Uncle Jimbo James Tyson is going to be with me on a charity investigation that we are doing at a local museum right here in the sticks of British Columbia, but he will be back on the air on Sunday night with Spaced Out Weekend. If you're listening in on the United Public Radio Network live on 107.7 FM in New Orleans, as well as 160 countries around the world, thank you for tuning in to Spaced Out Radio tonight. We are always live, and we run this show 7 days a week right here, right for you. Thank you for tuning in. If you're listening in on Revolution Radio, it is a donation station financed by you, the valued listener. Do us a favor, visit freedomslips.com and donate today. Remember, you can follow me on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio. Give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. On Instagram, I can be followed at Dave Scott, SOR. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. Tune us in on TuneIn. Download this show and others on iTunes, and our website is spacedoutradio.com. While there, you can check out our resident guitar god, Ron Bumblefoot THAL. Read up on my latest blog. Read up on the SOR Spacewire by our news director, Eric Markham. Check out the SOR Sightlines report. If you've had a weird experience you can't explain, you want it investigated, Mike Schmidt is waiting for you to fill out a Sightlines report today. And you can join the SOR Space Travelers Club. It's only $5 a month. We got a bunch of swag to give you. You have to sign up in order to get involved. Tonight we are talking about the plains of San Augustin, 1947, a UFO crash there. At the same time, it crashed in Roswell, New Mexico, except this is like the hidden gem. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to discuss it. But we're talking about it tonight with Ray Szymanski, Renee Carkin, Steve Colbern, and we welcome them back into Spaced Out Radio now. Now, Renee, during the break, I just sit back and listen to you guys because you guys are phenomenal. But during the break, you brought up an extremely important point here. Gerald Anderson is pretty much the last sole survivor. His brother, unfortunately, is on his last legs. And Gerald will be the sole survivor of the witness to this crash that we know of. And yet, the way this whole event has been covered up, this is almost too good to be true for those who want to bury this thing right in the ground and never talk about it again, isn't it?
Oh, certainly. You know, if you can't discredit the site, you wait until the last living survivor has passed away, and then you can just kind of brush the dirt off yourself and move forward and just leave that part of history uncovered. You know, I've become so cynical. I'm going to be 67 in December, and I've become very cynical about humanity. And I'm so sorry that I'm cynical about ufology, because the people that seem to be in charge of everything just want to spread misinformation, disinformation, and boy, they have fancy titles, and some of them have really fancy educations, but I don't know how they can put their heads on their pillows at night when they're involved in this kind of a cover-up. And again, it's beyond national security. I don't know what it is. I haven't figured it out, but I think it's a tragedy that somebody like Gerald Anderson is not interviewed on television and allowed to come to these conferences and be a speaker. And I've bent over backwards when we've had to suggest who upcoming speakers should be. You know, Gerald Anderson. I mean, God, he's still alive. He's not senile. Not that I know of. I talk to him fairly regularly. But, you know, right now he's just disgusted, and you can't blame him. It's like he's got a life of his own. But anyway.
But it's a matter of It's a matter of agendas, isn't it, though, Steve? That, you know, this isn't a sexy case because it's been covered up for so long. Roswell is sexy. Kecksburg is sexy. Even though it's not talked about in Canada here, the Shag Harbor incident is sexy. But for some reason, there's nothing sexy about San Augustin, and we might as well just push it out of the way, shouldn't we?
Well, perhaps they're feeling like that because there's more evidence being found at the San Augustin site than at Roswell. I mean, they can talk about Roswell all they want and make it sexy and make it this and make it that, but if they don't find any actual pieces of the craft, then there's no problem from the government's point of view. Here, we're finding pound quantities of pieces of the craft, and that worries them, I think.
Well, I understand that, but Roswell, for instance, they have the annual Roswell Festival. They've got a museum there. It's become a tourist attraction. It's become everything, much like the Mothman has in Point Pleasant, New Jersey. You know, and it just seems like, I don't know, that illegitimate red-headed child that is kind of pushed to the side. I realize that's a pun, but Ray, what do you think about that?
Well, if I understand correctly, the plains of San Augustin is really in the middle of nowhere. Yeah. And in my book, I posit that if we do prove that the evidence is extraterrestrial, then what we need to do is build the best UFO museum ever right there on the site and make it 5 times the size of Roswell, because if you build it, they will come if you fill it with fragments of metal that you have proven beyond a shadow of a doubt scientifically using ICP-MS and all the electron microscope stuff and everything else that it did indeed not come from this planet. People will show up to it. And then, as I've tried to explain in the book, the Roswell people should bow down and thank the people like Steve Colbern who have proven that we have been visited by extraterrestrial craft, and they can yell out to the world, hey, we've told you about Roswell for 69 years. Nanny, nanny, boo-boo, we told you we were right. It would be a boon to the UFO industry as a whole. And what do they say? Rising waters raise all boats. And so it would be a fantastic windfall, not only for the planes, but a fantastic windfall for all the UFO researchers who have been touting Roswell for all these years. I just don't see why they have a conflict of interest.
And we could call that section of planes Alien Acres.
Sounds good to me.
And why not? And why not, Steve? Because on the flip side, we're sitting on a gemstone. We have the information, we have the metals, the materials that go along with it that weren't recovered from such a great cleanup that the U.S. government did and the military did at Roswell. So here we're sitting on so much more than what Roswell ever was.
Yeah, that's true. They cleaned up Roswell very thoroughly. I mean, there's no fragments left at Roswell bigger than a few milligrams, but that's not the case here. There's probably several more pounds of material here that they have not picked up. We already picked up several pounds of material, and I think we've got more than enough here to blow this case out of the water. If we had more funding, we could send the material to a couple more labs and prove to the scientific community once and for all that it's extraterrestrial, and build the museum that they're talking about, and really put this whole thing to rest, that we are being visited by aliens. And I don't know if the government's going to let that happen. though. They've really run me through the ringer on this. I mean, my wife left me, and my whole life has imploded. And I have reason to believe it was because of this case, among other things, that I was doing in the UFO community.
I think the interesting thing is, and this isn't brought up very much, I think I mentioned it when you interviewed me, Dave, a couple years ago, this incident on the plains was discovered by the government. They were tracking things with UFOs, because they were there within 12 hours. They were there by 12 noon on July 4th. And Mac Brazel did not make his announcement down in Roswell to the sheriff to begin with until around July 7th or 8th. So the recovery of the craft from the plains of San Augustin preceded the recovery of the Roswell craft by 4 days.
Yeah.
So this is actually the premier downing of a craft in New Mexico during that era.
That's why.
And if there was a second, and it had to do with, that was their first craft, and they just wanted to cover it and get it out of there quick. And I understand, I don't remember because there were so many sources, that they had gotten truckloads of junk and junk metal from the Camado dump. Camado is a town, I'm going to say 25, 35 miles away, and there's like a dirt road that goes directly from the Camado dump toward the plains of San Augustin at the old Horse Springs site. And they had to, I guess when the craft came down, it put quite a gouge in the 200 feet of land before it landed against the side of a ridge. And they had to fill that in. And they filled it in with dirt from the Camado dump that had old tin cans, so that when you're out there on the plains, and Steve, you probably weren't aware of that because when I was out with you and the others, it was very overgrown. It was just beautiful. But it was discouraging because we didn't catch anything anything. We didn't find anything.
Tim Taylor and Chuck Wade and Art Campbell told me that.
Right.
I shot there deliberately to muddy the waters.
Because when you're out there with the metal detector, you have to look at everything very carefully, because you're getting old tin cans, sardine cans, and you can tell that these, they're probably from the 20s and the 30s, and that there is no dump at Old Horse Springs, New Mexico. All that stuff was brought in by the government at the time of the 1947's crash, and that was just done so that if there were any metal fragments, I'm trying to think of the logic, and they were out of there, I understand, really fast. So that was their first experiment in extracting a craft, getting it off the crash site. And Roswell, I'm still not certain if there was a second craft, but Gerald is certain by virtue of the gash that was in the side of the one on the plains that it had and mid-air collision. And all the stories, like in Witness to Roswell by Carrie and Schmidt, they talk about the electrical storms. And I know there are fierce electrical storms here in New Mexico at that time of year. So they say that the sheep rancher was, out there in some kind of a shed, and he heard the crack of the lightning. So I don't think it was high-powered radar that interrupted them. I just think that there was a mid-air collision, and probably just the electricity from the electrical storm is what might have interfered so that two of the craft crashed. One going down over Roswell and the lesser damage gliding 150 miles west onto the plains.
Let me ask you this, because, and I'm going to use a local example here. The people around, we can talk government cover-ups all we want, but the people around may not want the attention at all, because that is a farming area, as sparse as it is. And I'm going to use an example up here in the community I live in. There's only 2,000 people. And in 1988, one of the best noted alien abductions happened a mile out of town, right along the highway. You may have heard of the name Miriam Delicado. And yet there is very few people in this community who actually know that happened, that actually care that happened. People don't like attention when it is something they can't explain. So how much of this is the people in the area keeping this story quiet as well, Renee?
Catron County, per capita, is the least populated county in the United States. Take that into account, okay? There's just nothing. It's just this big, wide expanse of nothing. The VLA, Very Large Array, is in that area. And Gerald had been a private pilot. And, of course, over the years, he's always drawn back to it in terms of research. And I guess the aerial maps over the plains of San Augustin, it's kind of like a no-fly zone, the better part of it, which he found rather surprising when he had done that research. And I am a part-time substitute teacher in the Deming, New Mexico school district. And one of the teachers that I was working with the other day, you chit-chat and you introduce yourself, and she said she came from Reserve, New Mexico. Well, Reserve, New Mexico is about, I'm going to say 38, maybe 40 miles from Old Horse Springs, where Gerald's craft, I call it Gerald's craft, went down. And I mentioned to her, I said, hey, did you ever hear anything about the UFO crash on the plains? And she says, oh, yeah, at Old Horse Springs. We all know about that. And I said, really? She said, yeah, we talk about it. And she said, there are UFOs out there all the time. She said, we take it for granted. I said, what? And she said, oh, yeah. She said, we see unusual maneuvers going on that conventional aircraft can't do, 90-degree turns going from down to straight up, and they just take it for granted because whoever these creatures are, they don't mean us any harm, and they evidently and maybe they're responding to the signals that are being sent out by the VLA. And the VLA, Very Large Array, is situated just about halfway between Magdalena, New Mexico, and Daffel, New Mexico, if anybody has an atlas and want to look that up. And then 29 miles from Daffel, New Mexico, where Steve and I and several of the others stayed in the only motel. It's the only motel combination, restaurant, gas station, general store. It is essentially the town of Daffel, and the crash site is 29 miles from there. And there's just nothing out there. It is the largest unpopulated county in the United States, and it's beautiful. I think New Mexico's the best kept secret anyway, but I'm partial to this state.
I have a couple people on my team here who actually live in New Mexico, so I hear how beautiful it is there, and I have to get down there one day. I really do.
Oh, definitely.
Ray, I'm curious your opinion of the public maybe trying to keep this quiet as well.
Well, I had a interesting conversation with a gentleman when I was investigating Exeter, New Hampshire. It's a famous 1965 sighting by a 19-year-old by the name of Norman Muscarello. And Norman was walking along Highway 150 there, trying to thumb a ride home in the early morning, and the UFO, a 90-foot craft, nearly crushed him. You know, it was like 25 feet over his head. They went back out with a police officer when he got into town, and the police officer, Bertrand, and Officer Hunt both saw the craft in the same place that Norman had seen it about an hour prior. And I went there in 2008 and made this the first chapter of my book to try to find witnesses who might not have told their story. And I came across a man whose name is Steve, and Steve was an important witness because in later years he owned the Carl Dining Farm, and the dining farm was intrinsic to the story because it was between that farm and another farm, and the Russell farm, that Norman and the police officers saw the craft. So I asked Steve, I said, well, you own this farm, and he told me about the damage that the horses did that night, and they kicked out the walls because they were so disturbed that this craft was in the area, and he saw the damage because he owned the farm eventually. But he was a instructor at the Exeter Academy, which is very famous, has a lot of famous people who've gone through there. And I asked him what his basic understanding or exposure was to the Exeter story. And you had a famous author, John Fuller, running around interviewing people. It was all over the newspapers. And he basically said he was absolutely, totally, 100% unaware that a UFO was chasing around that area for several months. So even though, you know, it was basically on the radio back then and in the newspapers and, you know, whatever, he was not atypical. He said there were just a lot of people who were totally oblivious to the fact that this was going on. It wasn't part of their life. You know, they were in their own world. So, yeah, you know, even if you're in the center of the storm, a lot of the public is just totally unaware of what's going on. And that's a shame, in my opinion.
Do you think then, Steve, that the public may have a say on whether or not this is kept quiet along with the government cover-up? Or do you think maybe the government told the people in a number of areas, maybe more so back then than today, that this is probably good that we just don't talk about this?
I think the government threatened a lot of witnesses into keeping quiet. I don't think the public has much of a say in it unless they want to take a big risk. Several people from the Roswell incident said that people from the government threatened to kill them if they ever said anything about it. And it's too bad because if they had come clean with this back in 1947, it might have been better for us now. You know, if the aliens are hostile, like some government people are saying, you can't fight. People can't fight things that they don't believe in, so it would have been better from a national security standpoint if things are as bad as some people in the government say to have come clean about it back then, but that didn't happen, so we'll see how it goes, but it's got to come out eventually, but who knows when at this point.
Do you think
I think it'll all be
ahead,
buried by the time Gerald Anderson passes away, whether that's 5 months, 5 years. I think that this is just meant to just disappear in history like so many things we don't know about history. You know, history is written by the victors, and if the government is successful in just keeping this situation buried, you know, it's like those of us that might have a sample or two of the material, it doesn't mean anything. It's only if the site is declared real that any of the pieces actually begin to have any value. And
yeah, it's relatively easy for the government to keep this kind of stuff secret because people don't want to believe in it anyway. Apparently, a lot of people are afraid to believe in it, and no matter how much evidence you show them, they want to remain in denial. I've experienced quite a bit of that myself, trying to explain this to people.
Do you think people are afraid, Steve? Is that what it is? Is it fear that on this one we just may actually have a lot of the testing results necessary to prove some sort of disclosure?
Yeah, we have the evidence to prove it, and I think that the government's worried about people being afraid. A lot of people are afraid. About probably 2/3 of the population, based on what I've seen so far, is afraid of this kind of stuff. The other third are ready for disclosure, but they basically already know because the stuff already has been disclosed for the most part. The information's out there to anybody that wants to research it, but there has not been any official government announcement yet to convince the other 2/3.
Of course not. And they're all waiting on that because there is 2/3 of the population out there who thinks we're all whack jobs, that none of this exists.
Right. You're absolutely
Hey,
right.
Dave, just 6 years ago, I thought anybody that was interested in this stuff was a little left of center. It was only after, that week I spent in Roswell that I just had a couple of hair-raising situations that made me a drop-dead believer.
Renee, all I can say is try having a UFO land 150 feet away from you. It'll make you a believer pretty quick. That's what happened to me.
Where was this?
Wow.
This happened in March of 2014 at about 10 o'clock p.m. in British Columbia here.
Well,
just 2.5 years ago?
Yeah.
Can you describe the craft?
It was 150 yards away. All I know is it was pitch black out, and it was on the ground behind some trees, and it was the brightest white light I had ever seen, and I remember not being able to blink. Like, I didn't have to blink. It wasn't hurting my eyes, as bright as that white light was. And in the center of it, I never saw the shape of the craft, but I do know that in the center of the craft, there was this large cylinder of the most beautiful blue I had ever seen. And I had a witness with me, and 3 times it turned its lights on the ground. And after each time it turned it off, I asked it to turn it back on, and it turned its lights back on.
They're
telepathy.
Most aliens are telepathic.
Yeah, it was.
It may not have hurt your eyes because you thought you saw a light, but a lot of it may not have been real light, if that makes any sense. They can telepathically stimulate your brain to make you think you're seeing light, and you're not actually seeing it with your eyes. Same with sound.
Well, there was no sound, but the way this light was pushing through the trees, and the way it was lighting up, and it was a very low cloud level. Like, when you get those misty cloud days where the cloud level's maybe 50, 100 feet, if that?
Yeah.
The light was going right through the clouds.
Yeah, so that tends to support my point.
Yeah.
That it might not have been real light, but telepathic light, or whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of weird stuff associated with UFOs. Like, for example, my son and I had a UFO sighting a few months back where alternately I would be seeing them and he couldn't. And then later on, a few miles down the road, he was seeing them and I couldn't. It was like they were showing off or something, telling us that they could have that ability to make only certain people see them.
Mm-hmm. I fully agree on that. I've had that happen before in my life, too, just not that close. Not that up close and personal.
How long did it stay there?
5 minutes.
and you just stood there? You didn't try to approach it?
I had too much holy shit going on in my mind at that point. You know, and I will tell you this. I don't care, and I've said this on this show before. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you believe or how you think you would act until you are put in that situation where you see something that up close and personal that has, you know, technically is not supposed to exist or only happen in places like New Mexico. When it's happening in your friend's backyard, you tend to just take it all in. Now,
I have a lot in British Columbia too. I understand.
Yes, it does. Now, the interesting part about this was 5 days after this incident or this sighting, I was introduced to a young lady named Samantha Mowat, where eventually you will get to know her name. To me, she is the best kept secret in the field of ufology. She's been a lifetime contactee. And I can tell you this, I showed her in the daylight 5 days later where the craft was. She is very telepathic. She picked up on the craft. All of a sudden she says, "Hey, I'm picking up something. Let's go in the forest behind the yard." Yeah, okay, let's go back there. We walked in about 150 yards, and she goes, "Dave, I want you to just look at me for a minute." So I turn and I look at her. She goes, "I don't want you to be afraid, but I want you to look that way," as she points north, "and I want you to tell me what you see." And at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, God is my witness, swear on my children's lives, I looked straight ahead after she told me, and there was a 10 to 12 foot extraterrestrial being standing there.
What did it look like?
Very thin, bulbous head. I didn't see any arms. I didn't see any legs. There was a secondary creature there. I did not see that one. Samantha was telepathically communicating with that one. That one said that we were more than welcome to walk over, but once again, I was too freaked out. I didn't go over. Not doing that. I'm 40 years old, man. I got a lot of stuff to live for. I wasn't taking any chances.
Well, it may be a good idea you didn't walk toward the first craft at any rate. Travis Walton, I think, set off an automatic defense system of some kind and got killed, and I think they brought him back to life.
Yes, I agree with that.
That's what accounted for the long duration of the abduction, in my opinion. Dr. Lear told me what first thought of that, and I totally agreed with that.
Well, you know, I think, you know, I spent a day with Travis once and asked him about that, and his take currently, you know, which has changed from the first time he told the story, is that he just thinks that it was a standard discharge of, you know, like a static discharge of the ship, or, you know, when they were actually getting ready to take off, you know, when they're starting to spin up whatever power source they have. And you know how things happen, you know, ground is ground electrically, and unfortunately he was standing under the craft, so he was between a normal, you know, startup static discharge and Earth, and it went through him. And he originally thought he was abducted, but he came to the realization years later that they kept him on board for 5 days so that he could heal properly. And that's his current position. So, there's
a lot of really powerful forces near these craft that we should stay away from.
Exactly. So his crewmates thought it was weaponized, and that's why they left down the hill for 30 minutes before they came to their senses. But Travis thinks that it was just, you know, standard operating procedure, and he just happened to be, you know, short-circuiting their normal discharge.
There's also a reason to believe that these craft give off a lot of X-rays and microwaves that could be dangerous up close when they've got their drive operating at high power.
You know, you talk about the telepathy, and I'm reminded of Gerald Anderson. I said, "What was the creature like?" And he said, it made eye contact with me. It moved its head very fast in my direction and looked at me. And he said, when it did, he said, I got this immediate headache, and I felt and saw all the tremor, all the terror in my mind's eye that the creatures went through as they were making the crash landing. And he said it when he stops and thinks about it, he relives that terror that was telepathically, sent to him. And his father shielded his face because the father saw the creature looking directly at Gerald, and it was just bizarre. But that telepathy is definitely there, because Gerald picked right up on it, and he said he could remember. He can remember to this day what the creatures felt like coming down.
It's a surreal experience.
Must down some telepathy gives you a headache.
Yeah, he had a headache.
And it's almost the same as what people and a lot of psychics admit to with channeling, is that it gives you a headache. It drains your body. It makes you feel like you haven't slept in days. Is that pretty much the same thing that Gerald was feeling?
Now, he didn't talk about fatigue, if 5-year-olds probably still take naps. But I remember the first time he met, what's his name? Friedman. First time he met Stanton Friedman, and he was introduced to him. Friedman had done research and knew that the little boy that was out there had a red outfit. Or maybe it was the second time he met him, because the first time he met Gerald was a cold call to him after a show on TV. But Gerald described what he was wearing, and that's how Stanton Friedman knew that he was the kid, because he had already read about the government reports on what the kid was wearing. It was red overalls or something like that. So Stanton knows that he's legitimate and why he won't step forward, and I don't know. I don't get it. I'm not supposed to get it, I guess.
Well, Ray,
what do you think?
Oh, we were thinking alike, Renee.
Yep.
Ray?
Ray? Please restate the question.
Well, just in regards to the whole experience, the telepathy of everything, that it seems like people who are experienced or come in contact with extraterrestrials get that telepathic download that can just mess with them a little bit.
Well, if you look at the famous case of Rendlesham Forest, Jim Peniston went off into the forest with John Burroughs and Ed Kabansang, and Peniston, in some ill-advised, superhero move, put his hand on this 10-foot glass, triangular-shaped UFO that was sitting there in Rendlesham, and he touched the largest glyph that was carved into the side of the craft and got a download. He saw lights flashing. He basically fell to the ground. And then the moment that he was released after writing his daily report, went back to his home, opened up his notebook, and wrote 16 pages of seemingly random series of ones and zeros. And then when he was done, he closed the notebook, and through dozens of drug-fueled interrogations by agencies that he's not sure who they represented, never once mentioned the fact that he'd written this series of ones and zeros in his notebook, which is really strange because, you're giving sodium pentothal and who knows what, and pretty much they can drop all those barriers. But whoever gave him that download must have told him, you're going to hold on to this, you're never going to reveal it. And he didn't for 30 years. Then suddenly he has a encounter with John Burroughs while they were going to do a film of a documentary. And Burroughs goes, "Hey, how about that notebook that you put the sketch in?" And he said, "Yeah, here it is." And Burroughs is flipping, and he goes, "What is this whole strings of ones and zeros?" And Peniston says, I have a foggiest idea. And Burroughs said, "This looks like computer code." And sure enough, when it was decoded, and then they didn't have to monkey it. They just basically did a straight binary code decoding. It came up with this great message like the craft was back from the future, it was exploring Earth, and it gave the geographic locations of a handful of key sites like the Pyramids of Giza, the Nazca Line, some famous temple in China, and gave precise locations. But this was a super telepathic download to Keniston from the spaceship. Obviously, their technology allowed it to happen. And sure enough, 30 years later, it was simply decoded as a message from the future. So yeah, this kind of thing, that's kind of maybe an extreme example of it, but apparently, there's real physical proof in the Keniston binary code that this kind of stuff happens.
Renee, did Gerald ever get any other type of telepathic communication after this incident?
No, but he said sometimes when he dreams, he still remembers things. And he said he has felt the terror of those creatures on several occasions. It just, comes back. No, that's the only thing. And he's never seen a craft since, never had any kind of experience. He was never been abducted, nothing like that.
That he knows of.
I guess that he knows of.
So, even after that one creature left the site with the Army, because they obviously confiscated the creatures as well, was that creature still able to communicate with Gerald or send him thoughts? Did Gerald know what was going on?
No, but I know that there was one creature that was in the custody of Lieutenant Colonel Corso, and I think it might have been that particular creature, because Corso was able to communicate with the creature. And when Corso met Gerald in 1997 at the 50th anniversary of Roswell and was introduced, he smiled broadly and said, "I know all about you." And I think it was in one of the books I read that it's not anything Gerald told me, it's something I read, that the creature communicated to him about the planes.
So where does this site go from here? Because, as you said, Renee, people are getting older on a daily basis. Eventually, the information highway is going to die off, unfortunately.
Yep, and I think it's dying off very quickly, and I think the powers that be, sort of like the one world government and Hillary, and unless there's a Trump of UFOs that can come forward and be legitimate about everything and have, the peoples, and I think the people need to know, and I don't care if it blasts traditional religion out of the water. I think people are savvy enough in this day and age of instantaneous communication to accept pretty much that comes down the pike. And so I still don't quite get why there's such a cover-up and that there's so much money involved in it.
The reason is because if they admitted to all this, they'd have to admit that these aliens are far beyond our technology, and they can come and go as they please, and the government can't.
Well, they can. So what? They're not killing us. It's not like that movie, Independence Day. I don't think they have any intention.
They've been invading for years covertly, and government can't admit that they can't keep them out because that would render them irrelevant, pretty much. People would say, well, why are we, being loyal to you? Well, we should be being loyal to these aliens that are coming in, or they would lose faith in the government. And that's the exact opposite of what the government wants. I agree with you. They should disclose it because it is the truth, but I think that it would undermine government so much that government's never going to do it unless they're forced to.
Is the information Okay, sorry, Ray, go ahead.
The other aspect is economic. If Corso is correct, and we've been taking the bones and scavenging the technology and then creating industries out of it, fiber optics, computers, and whatnot, then there's a huge economic impact. Assume for a moment that the U.S. Has captured the only craft that are reverse engineerable, and we're basically creating economies here because of all the technology that we're slowly bringing out. Well, do we want to share this technology with other governments? Probably not. With other countries? Probably not, because it helps maintain our economic status and our military status and our technological advantage. So if we were to announce it, then you're going to get a lot of international pressure to go, hey, share the wealth a little bit. So I think that's another aspect that might explain why they don't want to fess up.
And that's something that Stanton Friedman sort of expressed to me, that why would we want to have to give up the secrets that we were fortunate enough to get? But, there have been crashes in other countries also. So it isn't that other countries, that, these crashes are just taking place in the good old USA. It's been happening in other countries around the world. So they have access to the same technology we have. It's, I kind of wonder, why most of the crop circles are in England. Something to do with ley lines, or, I'm not privy to that, but I don't know. The crashes are in other places too, so they can take advantage of the technology.
And that's where the whole conspiracy now comes in. And it's that open door. We don't want to have that door open, but eventually, Ray, it always leads to that government cover-up, doesn't it?
I spent my career working for the government, and I hear a lot of people, and many of them are making a career out of yelling, government cover-up, government cover-up. I got to tell you, we've got a lot of other things to do than to cover things up. And look at the Air Force. They were given a job they couldn't possibly do, and that's keep the skies clear of whatever was out there buzzing around and explaining it to the public. And so if you had a job that you could not do, and millions of people were putting pressure on you to do the job, and you knew you couldn't do it, what would you do? You'd quit, wouldn't you? You'd get out of the business. So I think just to protect themselves, from an early grave and an early straitjacket, they just had to deep six it and go, look, it's not of defense significance. These people are getting abducted. Yeah, they buzz our nuclear power plants, but they're not zapping us with rays. They're not polluting our streams and our oceans. And, they're killing a few cows. But we can't let the public know that they're out there, because they're going to come screaming to have us do a job we can't possibly do. And so, the cover-up may not be nefarious. It may be just out of necessity to go, get off of our backs. And I don't agree with it. I'm just saying, this deep, dark conspiracy, we hate the rest of the American public. I just can't buy that on some occasions.
Well, on the flip side here, what else are they supposed to do with it? Obviously, they've made a commitment to hiding this from everybody, maybe out of public fear, because as we were speaking on this show last night, Steve, we were talking about if the public was truly ready for disclosure. And if all of a sudden you come out with this, you're opening up an already frigid and fear-mongering public with everything that is going on. Now you throw aliens into the group, and holy cow, you have opened up Pandora's box.
Yeah, that's true.
Do you really think so?
I honestly believe that.
There would be panic for a few weeks, probably, if they announced this officially, but people can only panic for so long.
Renee, you don't believe that?
I think it would affect the religious community more than anything, because they then have to read in their Bible to find out, about the fiery chariot. I have some book that talks about UFO in the Bible, UFOs, and that there's
never
a lot of...
underestimate the lunacy of the far religious community. I found that out the hard way for my exercise.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
But I think that it would be difficult for these religious fanatics to accept, and there would be some panic, in my opinion, for a few weeks, but it would die down if they announced it.
Let alone all the gun fanatics, and I'm not turning this into a Second Amendment debate, but the gun fanatics would be going crazy and storing and stocking up on ammo and any type of munitions they could get. I'm sure they will be looking for rocket launchers.
Well, gun fanatics are downright sane compared to a lot of these religious fanatics, I would say, but in terms of weapons, no weapon will protect you from these guys. They're experts at mind control. They can make you see things, hear things, hallucinate. They can make you do things. They don't have to resort to primitive methods like punishing you until you do what they say. They can just make you want it. They can just reach into your mind and make you want to do it. No weapon will protect you from them. You know, you're out of your league trying to fight these people. They remind me of a high-tech foreign military. They also remind me of Nazis. In fact, Hitler's regime was the first to have contact with them. I think that they rubbed off on them.
You don't believe that there are any benevolent species?
No, I believe there's benevolent species out there, and I don't think the Greys that people report seeing most often are scum-sucking evil or anything. They're here having a job to do, and they're here mostly for themselves. They're not space brothers that are out to mainly save our society or anything. They think our society is crazy and primitive.
Ray, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this.
Well, we were talking about the panic and something that people can't get their minds around. You know, think about it. For 2,000 years, the Catholic Church had Italian popes, for the most part. And suddenly, you know, Pope John Paul, a Polish guy, gets elected, and 20 million pairs of Italian hands stop moving. It was a shock. He turned out to be a great guy and a great leader, and, you know, people got over it. They moved on, and things were fine. Now, in recent days, you know, there was the election of Donald Trump. Half the people in America didn't vote for him. They're all upset, you know. They're you know, protesting. You know, this is a great country. You get to speak your voice. But, you know, the country was moving left for several years, you know. Trump's coming from the right. You know, we're going to go back to the center. That's the way the country works. So, yeah, we're kind of pushed out of shape. You know, 8 years of Obama, we'll get a little bit pushed back in a different direction with Trump, but lives will go on. People will do what they normally do. They'll suck it up, and they'll make the best of it. So I think I agree with Steve, and I agree with Renee that it's going to be a little bit of panic. It's going to be, what do we do, you know? But once we get our heads around it, I think then we can focus on the problems that these people are causing. For example, I know people, you know, people have come forward to me since my book got published and said, hey, you know, you're somebody I know I can talk to because you understand this. And they're afraid to tell anybody that they're experiencers, and their families are experiencers now. They were, you know, from a small child, and then their spouse, you know, got subjected to this, and now their children are. And, for example, they need more support groups for people to deal with this, because even the trained psychiatrists and psychologists that can handle this thing and are trained for it are few and far between. So, you know, once we face the facts, then the guys and gals who can be the therapist that can help these people, it's going to be mainstream. It's going to be something that is recognized and that can be treated and help these people. And if we keep it in the dark, we're doing a major injustice to all the people who are seeking help or need the help and have nowhere to really turn for that assistance.
We only have about 2 minutes, guys.
Right now, people that are experiencers that have this phenomenon coming into their lives have nowhere to really turn. I mean, if they go to a professional doctor or anybody affiliated with the healthcare community, they run the risk of being labeled insane or mentally imbalanced, and that's not right. You have to find somebody that's into this stuff in order to have a safe place to go, and that's there's very few of those.
We only got about 40 seconds left before we're going to take a break here. We are with Ray Szymanski, Renee Carkin, and Steve Colbern. We are talking about the crash of San Augustin, which happened at identical times as Roswell, except this one, the government says never happened. Nothing ever happened there. We got Roswell down here. We'll celebrate that one, but we're going to just keep this one hush. It's amazing how they can pick and choose which UFO crash they could celebrate and which one just gets swept under the rug. Kind of like, there's no aliens at Area 51. You're listening to Spaced Out Radio, hour number 3, right after this. Have a good one.
It happened, all right.
The SOR Sightlines is a place for you to find answers to your strange experiences. Hi there, this is Mike Schmidt. If you have had an encounter with ghosts, UFOs, Bigfoot, ETs, or anything else that doesn't make sense, head to spacedoutradio.com and file a Sightlines report. All information you give is 100% confidential, and I will personally help you find the answers you need. SOR Sightlines, your answers are a click away.
Greetings and salutations, space travelers, from the Chronicles of the Unknown team.
What is Chronicles of the Unknown? I keep hearing about this thing.
It's a new paranormal reality TV show based right here in beautiful British Columbia, Canada. Follow our team as we uncover claims of activity on the Caribou Gold Rush Trail. You can also follow us here every third Monday, where 2 members of our team will be available to answer your questions. We'll give you some equipment updates and some of our experiences on the road, right here on Spaced Out Radio.
Hi there, I'm Butch Witkowski, lead investigator with U4 Cop. On the final Monday of every month, you can listen to me and host Dave Scott on Spaced Out Radio's Strange Days. We're going to get to the heart of the matter when it comes to what's happening out there. People are seeing and experiencing things from ET contact to Bigfoot, and I want to hear about it. Your experiences are what we investigators need to help solve these unknown mysteries. So tune in at spacedoutradio.com to the final Monday of every month from Butch Witkowski's Strange Days.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. With their money-back guarantee and the many benefits, how can you afford not to get one? Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com for mind, body, and spirit, and expect a miracle.
This is your medium, Joanna, from Spaced Out Weekend, 2 mediums and a large. I would love it if you would come and join us with host James Tyson every other Sunday on Spaced Out Weekend. Together, we will take your calls and your questions live. Our goal is to provide you with a positive outlook on deep questions that you may have. Questions regarding love, relationships, money, or whatever else is on your mind. Come and check us out at spacedoutradio.com.
Have you checked out the SOR Spacewire at spacedoutradio.com yet? Every day we post the latest stories regarding the weird, strange, and completely unbelievable. From cryptid and UFO sightings to the conspiracy world, we tackle it all. Hi there, I'm Eric Markham, Space Out Radio's news director for the SOR Spacewire. And if you have a story, I want to hear it. Email me at news@spacedoutradio.com.
Patrolling the Pacific Northwest, We are always on the lookout for the strange and unassuming stories that real people are experiencing. Hi, I'm Vincent Zunza from Pacific North Weird. Me and Alexandra Sullivan have teamed to bring to you those odd stories that never seem to make it into the mainstream. Stories so weird that will leave you scratching your head wondering, is this real? It's as real as it gets with Pacific North Weird. You can watch our videos right here at spacedoutradio.com.
Become more intimate and interactive with Spaced Out Radio. Join our Space Travelers Club with your new membership. For $5 a month, we'll provide you with special access to the website, monthly prize draws from books to psychic readings, along with monthly newsletter, private interviews, and more. Sign up today to be part of Spaced Out Radio's experience.
Every month on Spaced Out Radio, we look into the deep and dark reports of cryptids roaming around the world with me, Rob Morphy from Cryptopia.us. I would love it if you would join me and host Dave Scott as we delve into the most arcane stories and reports regarding creatures of the unknown. My job is to hunt down the details and bring the evidence forward to you. These aren't your regular Bigfoot stories I'm talking about either. You can find out more about crypto history at spacedoutradio.com.
Looking for a place to advertise at a very reasonable cost? Look no further than Spaced Out Radio. SpacedOutRadio.com has an advertising tab that you can click to check out our daily, weekly, and monthly packages to play on the radio, or our website including social media. From commercial spots to banners, we have it all. Check out our competitive pricing today.
You hear footsteps in the empty room above you. A rocking chair begins rocking by itself. Don't be afraid of the things that go bump in the night. Reach for Spirit Storybox, the iPhone app the Huffington Post UK called the only ghost hunting app you will ever need. Spirit Storybox. The spirits are telling their stories. Are you listening?
Strange creatures lurking in the night, the sounds of wood knocking in the forest, odd happenings right out of a fictional world. These are the reports I love. Hi there, this is author Ronald Murphy, and I would love it if you join me and Spaced Out Radio host Dave Scott the second Wednesday of every month on our journey into the unknown land of cryptozoology at spacedoutradio.com. From Mothman to Frogman and everything in between. Hey, they don't call me the crypto guru for nothing.
Did you know that Spaced Out Radio runs 7 days a week? Hi, it's James Tyson from Spaced Out Weekend. Every Saturday and Sunday night, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, you can join me and my guests for some great chatter about what's going on out in the universe, or even in that dark part of the basement you really don't want to go back into. Well, let's find the answers to your experiences together. So come on up to Uncle Jimbo's cabin on the weekend. For more information, look us up at spacedoutradio.com.
Would you like to connect with us on Spaced Out Radio? Head to spacedoutradio.com to check out the latest shows, guests, and sponsors. And don't forget to sign up for the Space Travelers Club. You'll find all you need at spacedoutradio.com. Welcome back to the final hour of Spaced Out Radio tonight. Good to have you along for the ride. Bill Cardwell has decided it's not a password night, but Joe has stepped up in the SOR Space Travelers Club. Thank you, Joe. You get a big mention for this, and your great-looking hair as well. Drizzle is your password if you're an SOR Space Traveler. Drizzle is your password. Make sure you use it wisely, Space Travelers. We want to welcome everyone listening in on the United Public Radio Network, live on 107.7 FM in New Orleans and 160 countries around the world. Yes, we got about 20,000 listeners a night, thanks to UPRN. Thank you for accepting us into your nightly listening experience. We really appreciate it. If you're listening in on Revolution Radio, it is a donation station financed by you, the valued listener. Do us a favor, visit freedomslips.com and donate today. Remember, you can follow us all over social media. You can follow me on Twitter, @SpacedOutRadio. Give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. On Instagram, I can be followed at Dave Scott, SOR. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. Tune us in on TuneIn. Download this show and others on iTunes, and our website is spacedoutradio.com. While there, you can hang out and check out some of the cool features we have, like the SOR Space Travelers Club. It's only $5 a month. With that, you get some really cool swag that we give away at month's end. Our next draw will be next Friday, the 25th. You can also listen to some great music by our resident guitar god, Ron Bumblefoot THAL, formerly of Guns N' Roses. Read up on the SOR Space Wire by Eric Markham. You can check out my latest blog as well. You can fill out an SOR Sightlines report. Mike Schmidt is waiting for your report if you have anything weird, strange that you can't explain and you would like us to help. The SOR Sightlines report, just click on it today. We are talking about the San Augustin UFO crash. It's probably the best crash scenario that is never admitted about. It's a best-kept secret. But there is plenty of information, a plethora of material out there. And we're going to get into the science and the physical proof with Stephen Colbern, Renee Carkin, and Ray Szymanski on this. Welcome back, everyone.
Yep.
Glad to be here.
All right. I'm not a big user of the word science when it comes to this field, especially in the cryptid world and the ghostly world. But when it comes to the field of ufology, we really have to rely on science in order to get our proof. Now, because the military at the San Augustin crash site, Steve, did such a poor job of getting in and out, there was actually, literally 60 years later, plenty of materials still found that you believe are a part of this site.
Yeah, that's true. I first found out about this in 2008 at the UFO Congress. John Rao, who runs that conference, said that there was a bunch of material out there, and he found out from Chuck Wade and Art Campbell, who had been going out to the site for years previous. And Chuck Wade had just rented some bulldozers and heavy equipment and gone out there and found a bunch of material. And Mr. Rao had me do some analysis on the material to find out whether it was extraterrestrial or not, or whether it was unusual or not. And I ended up doing light microscopy, electron microscopy, EDX elemental analysis, and ICP-MS trace element analysis on the material, and it turned out to be pretty unusual stuff for 1947.
When you look at that material, how did you carbon date it to show that it actually came from 1947?
There's no way to carbon date the material. I mean, there's no way to date it really at all. I mean, but it certainly looked like it had been in the ground for a long time by the amount of corrosion. And the trace element analysis showed some unusual elements like gallium and rare earths, uranium and thorium, and to my knowledge, there were not any alloys in existence in that time frame that would have come from commercial sources.
Were there any materials that were recovered that had any metals or materials that were very strange to this planet, or maybe very extremely hard to find on Earth?
No, not really hard to find. It just that the trace element patterns didn't match aluminum coming from commercial sources at that time. They use some of these trace elements now to strengthen aluminum, although the mechanical properties of the material were not that unusual. But sample W6 did seem pretty strong, but we didn't get mechanical properties on it because the samples were very small, and you need fairly good-sized samples to do mechanical testing. I wouldn't be surprised if W6 would turn out to be at least somewhat stronger than current terrestrial aluminum samples. One thing that was kind of strange about them too is that samples W2 and W6 seem to have coatings deliberately applied to the aluminum. I don't think they had coated aluminum back then, but the W2 and W6 seem to have a silica coating on the surface. MUFON interpreted that as dirt, but it didn't look like dirt in a lot of the light and electron microscope photos I took.
Let's get into the MUFON side of the investigation for a minute, because they went in there and their opinion of what happened at this site seems so much different than what the research team that you were all a part of had committed to and put your reputations on the line to. Why do you think their investigation, Renee or Steve, was so much different than what you found?
Well, I think that to be quite honest, I think their investigation was a whitewash. I mean, I was trying to go where the evidence led, and I think they were just trying to show that it was not extraterrestrial by whatever means necessary. I know that the person that I promised not to reveal her name, but the person that did this analysis that was trying to refute my results. In this case, committed a fraud in another investigation just recently that I found out about. So I don't have much confidence in her whatsoever. And her report in this case seemed to be a total whitewash.
Well, it was not an impartial secondary analysis either, and we didn't find out about that until the conference call in early September 2014. The woman that conducted it, not only was she not a metals chemist, she was an oil chemist, but she also had been awarded some scientific award of the year from MUFON a year and a half before that. And that blew me away because that is hardly an impartial investigation. We got MUFON involved after Steve did his first analysis, knowing that they would have the contact somehow, somewhere to do, arrange for a good analysis, and it wasn't impartial. They had somebody within their own ranks do it, and MUFON is not into disclosure. It's not part of their agenda. They just seemingly just want to keep the myth alive. Plus, when Steve got a copy of the report, it was not a line-by-line, even analysis. They hardly, pardon the double meaning, they hardly scratched the surface of what needed to be done.
No, my report was more thorough than theirs. I mean, to put it bluntly, and their ICP-MS analysis, they were depicting as the end-all, be-all. It was it had an error 10 times greater than the one I did or had done. So that's part of the basis I'm which I'm saying this is a whitewash. If you're going to say that analysis is the end all be all, you want it to have a lower rate of error than the one that was done previously, not a higher one.
Ray, you're sitting back listening to all this. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
My thoughts are as follows. I was made privy by the person who wrote the report for MUFON. And what happened is there is a PhD, a very well-qualified individual who ran the tests for MUFON. And I read the report, and there were a couple of things in there that didn't quite strike me as being, proper protocol. And it's not because, I'm an ICP-MS expert. It's just, some things didn't make common sense. And one of those was a handful of statements throughout their report, which is UT085, that stated that the samples or fragments, if you will, that they tested in ICP-MS were covered in dirt. So I thought that was very unusual, because it would seem to me if you wanted to inspect anything, you would take away, the non-integral part of it, like, grease or wax or dirt that was on it, and get to the actual metal that formed the fragment itself. So I found out who the actual person was who conducted the test, who actually ran the ICP-MS test. And I had a 20-minute conversation with this individual, and I asked him directly, I said, did you clean the sample or samples prior to doing the ICP-MS and, the thickness measurement? And he described in long, gory detail how they did that, and said, yes, of course we cleaned it. That's what you would do. So I then went back to the MUFON person who wrote the report. So they basically took this PhD's data and created their interpretation of the data and wrote a report. So I said to the writer of the report, I basically just talked to the guy who did the stuff for you, and he said that it wasn't cleaned. And they came back and told me, oh yeah, it was unclean. That's right. No, we never cleaned it. So now the guy who actually did the work, his, verbal accounting of the process that he performed is pretty much opposite what the person who took his data and wrote about it. So, there's a conflict there, and I just, it throws the whole report in my mind into question. If we can't get something straight as simple as did you or did you not clean the item that you performed the test on, if you can't get that right, then, man, I have to question everything else that's written in that report. And that's where it sits. I've got that report, and I've got, Steve's original analysis where he calculated values, and then a third item where he actually did direct measurements. And I also called a company that does ICP-MS testing on a daily, hour-by-hour basis for people like the aerospace industry. And I talked to the quality control manager, and I said, if you've got a piece that you're going to do an ICP-MS test on and it's dirty, what do you do with it? He goes, oh, well, we'd clean it in an ultrasonic bath. Of course we would, which is consistent with what everyone is telling me except the person who wrote the MUFON report. So I'm confounded by it. I don't know what it means. It just doesn't make sense to me, and that's what I know.
Yeah, pretty much any chemist that did not clean a sample prior to a high precision test like ICP-MS would be considered incompetent. So there has to be some sort of a cleaning method with any type of testing of that nature. Just a question of how thoroughly you want to clean it, and how much of a chance you want to take of altering the sample. But there has to be some sort of a cleaning method.
So with the material that you gathered, and Steve, I'm going to focus on you here for a few minutes, did MUFON get their hands on any of the metal in their investigation, or was that kept from them?
No, they did get their hands on the material. I'm not sure how much. Chuck Wade sent them an unknown amount of material, and they analyzed it in these two reports. They got a sample W1, this foil material that was at the site, and part of an I-beam that was found in 2012, I believe it was, but they definitely got their hands on some of the material.
So, if they have the same material that you do, how are the results so drastically different?
I'm not sure. They detected some of the same elements that were detected in my ICP-MS test, but the amounts were different. In the test they did, the error amount was quite a bit greater, about 10 times greater, about 10 ppb as opposed to 1 ppb in the test that I had commissioned. And on one particular test in the I-beam, it almost seemed like they probably just took a piece of aluminum foil and analyzed it instead. I can't prove that, but I suspect some major issues going on there.
I remember they mentioned this. Further testing would have been very, very expensive, but that was the exact fall that MUFON had just dumped megabucks into the production of their program called Hangar 1.
Yeah, they said they were going to spend a lot of money on this test, and they didn't do it. And in order to prove this definitively to the satisfaction of the scientific community, you'd have to analyze it much more thoroughly at several other labs. That would cost money.
But they didn't want to deal with actual, the probability that this stuff could be real, because they wanted to focus on all these amorphous sightings that leave no physical evidence behind.
Oh yeah, physical
and
evidence makes them very uncomfortable. They want to be focused on the lights in the sky stage of the research, which we are well past. They want to support the government's viewpoint that UFOs, if they exist at all, are always safely in the stratosphere and not down here at ground level.
Yep. So their agenda is not disclosure; it's to keep the myth alive.
Yes.
And even if we got a second, third, and fourth independent lab that really wanted to get their hands on this material, if for nothing else, even if those people that would volunteer, even if they don't believe in UFOs, don't want to know, don't care if it, if they just want to get their hands on the material, to analyze it from a scientific standpoint, and then they'll just be so amazed. And even if you had to get 3 or 4 labs total besides Steve to do this, if you could get these and of course have a very specific chain of custody for the handling of the material, because I hate to say it, Chuck Wade has not always been discreet in the way that he has handled, the disposition of the material, the distribution of it. And, this stuff, if it's ever proved, quintessentially, unequivocally to be off-planet material, it will be totally uninsurable by Lloyd's of London, because the stuff will be that valuable.
Yeah, I agree, and I did get a second lab to analyze. I wanted to mention I did get a second lab to analyze 3 of the samples a couple of years back. I haven't published the results due to some personal issues I was having, my divorce and all, but we did get some anomalies in the isotopic ratios of copper and nickel and zinc in these 3 samples. They weren't as great as in the first series of tests, but they were significant nonetheless. And so that's 2 labs. If we could get a couple more, then this probably would be of interest to the scientific community.
What kind of cost are you looking at, Steve, to run an ICP-MS test that would give you the data that you're looking for?
The trace element test is about $500 with the lab I'm using, and if you want to do isotopic analysis, it's $50 per element. I was doing 3 or 4 elements in these tests, so between $150 and $200.
So we're looking at noise. Somebody wanted, some organization wanted to come forward. That's chewing gum money to them.
Oh yeah, to the government, this is less than pocket change. It's really frustrating to me that we can't come up with as a community a few thousand lousy bucks to do these tests and have it be definitive. But
MUFON made it sound like at the minimum it was going to be 10,000.
No.
But yet they had megabucks on the Hangar 1 series.
Well, they're in my opinion they're basically an Air Force.
Yeah, they picked up where Blue Book left off.
Yeah, they're being paid by the Air Force Office of Special Investigation, from what I understand, to collect sightings and physical evidence, and that's why you never hear anything.
I got a couple of questions here from the audience. Trip is asking, and I'll hit you up with this one, Steve. How many independent labs are actually left out there that would test this material without losing it to a corporation?
Quite a few. I mean, what you do is you just say you want something tested, and they ask what's in it. You say, well, it's aluminum, and that's all you really have to say. They're used to testing proprietary materials. They don't ask you a lot of questions. You don't say it came from a UFO. If you say it came from a UFO, then you're going to run into problems. But if you just say you want some samples tested, there's lots of labs that'll do it and won't give you any problems. And you send it by UPS or FedEx to bypass the U.S. mail system. That gives you even less problems. But you avoid at all costs saying it came from a UFO or it's possibly alien-related or anything like that.
And Renee, you're probably a good one to answer this one. Joe is asking, how many photos are there or parts in order to view this online? Is there a lot of material?
There is a sufficient amount. You can Google Chuck Wade. That's one name you can look up because he has pictures on his website. He is in possession of the highest percentage of the materials. Gerald Anderson has given several people, and I'm even not privy to who all those people are, but he has distributed a lot of the stuff that he had collected in many different hands because I guess he just doesn't trust the government. If they decide to come raid his house, they're not going to find much. I don't know how Chuck is safeguarding his stuff, but you can also look up under Art Campbell, Arthur Campbell, UFO, Plains of San Augustine, and his book called The UFO Crash at the Plains of San Augustine has several pages with pictures of material. Of particular interest is the honeycomb material, because there was a downed UFO, I believe it was in Japan, somewhere in the early 50s, and some of the material that comprised that craft is the same material that we found at the Plains of San Augustine. It's been called the honeycomb material, and Steve referenced that in the first hour when he talked about the rust-colored material that had something to do with propulsion. And that stuff, a big handful, it looks heavy, and when you're holding it in your hand, you don't even know you're holding anything. Absolutely feather light.
Yeah, well, the honeycomb, the hexagonal array like that is the lightest and strongest array possible. That's why honeycombs are made that way.
Steve, how would you answer the following question? people claim that honeycomb material is from a experimental craft that the government might have been running, or preposterous things like it's part of a refrigeration system from a normal refrigerator. How would you respond to those kind of comments?
Somebody said, I forget who it was, but somebody said that it was part of an SR-71 that was dumped there. And I would just say that...
Yeah, but that crash was in a separate section of the plains, and the plains is so huge, you can't compare what happened at our site compared to where that craft landed. Separate animal entirely.
SR-71s are made of titanium anyway, and not aluminum. They have to stand up to a high heat. UFOs not have to stand up to such high heat because they have a gravitational field around the craft that moves the air away from the craft, and not that much hits the material itself. So, in any event, they don't get very hot compared to a craft that does not have a field around it. And
and that's the reason why photos of UFOs have this fogginess around them, and people say, "Why can't we get a clear photo of UFOs?" It's
there's
because
a cloud
of
or a
that
plasma
field.
envelope around the craft, and there's also a gravitational field around the craft. Anti-gravity is the only way to fly. I mean, the U.S. government's been aware of how to do anti-gravity for quite a while, and frankly, rockets would have been obsolete in the 80s if all the classified technology were allowed out.
Dave, regarding those photographs, I have a bountiful library of them from Art Campbell. So if he gives me permission, would you post some of them on your website?
Absolutely, we would. Absolutely.
Okay. I'll contact the owner of the photos and, tell him what we're up to and see if I can get some permission to send you a couple.
That would be great. I have a follow-up question for you, Steve, from Tripp, and he is asking, getting back to the independent laboratories, wouldn't an unknown element be a red flag for strange material, and that might be the reason why maybe some of this disappears?
Sure, an unknown element would be a huge red flag. I detected no unknown elements, but then again, we were not looking for any. But the elements we did detect, several of them had strange ratios of isotopes, and that often indicates an extraterrestrial origin. Either these samples were extraterrestrial and probably came from way outside our solar system and from a different part of the galaxy, or they were exposed to very high levels of neutron or proton radiation. Either way, they're very unusual.
Renee, do you trust this material going to different laboratories for the sake that it might disappear?
Well, you have to have a chain of custody. I'm not familiar with exactly how that works. I know that Antonio Paris was sent a lot of samples by Chuck Wade for analysis a couple years ago, and I guess he was trusting the wrong person. And when Chuck queried, after a couple months, hey, when am I going to get the stuff back? Antonio Paris evidently told him, it was all junk, we threw it out. So when you say about, passing it along to somebody, there's an example of somebody that was given it who was untrustworthy. Even if it had been tested as junk, it was still the property of Chuck Wade and should have been in good conscience and good ethical business practices sent back to him and not just thrown out. And all of us in the Plains gang were a little upset with Chuck for his handling of that situation.
Well, it certainly doesn't act like the material is very precious, that's for sure.
Yep. And so the government or somebody is using it for whatever purposes, medical. Some of the groups use it for, making medical material and all that sort of thing.
Well, it's amazing where if it just disappeared out of Antonio Paris's hands, where it could have ended up, because throwing potential space remnants just in the garbage because a personal opinion that it isn't real just doesn't seem very plausible to me, especially with the way this field works.
They handed it over to the Air Force, I'm 99% sure.
Yeah, it wasn't thrown out.
No.
It ended up in some secret facility for further testing, analysis, for back engineering, whatever you call it.
And I think further insight into the Paris situation, you can find a quote from him online in an article that was widely distributed. He said, a ghost hunting team analyzed the metal. And he was basically dissing Steve Colbern and company and their results. And, you can see what Renee said earlier. If you can't defeat the evidence, go after, the messenger. And to call...
Who's the ghost team?
In the article that Antonio Paris wrote regarding their assessment of the material they got from Chuck Wade, and I'm reading it because I wrote it verbatim from the article I read, and I can send that to you later, Steve. It said, a ghost hunting team analyzed the metal. And I can only assume that since you were the only non-MUFON team to test it, that indeed he was talking about your efforts. And so it just kind of shows the mindset.
Yeah, I take great exception to that. I'm a scientist, not a ghost hunter. I've never hunted a ghost in my life.
Yeah, so it just goes to show you the mindset of this investigation if those kinds of, inflammatory accusations are being leveled.
There's an interesting expression. You're over the target when there's lots of flack. Yeah. Well, in this case, because they're trying to bury this site, you could almost say the opposite. You're over the target when there's no flack.
That's definitely one way to look at it, for sure. I mean, if you are literally taking a lot of heat over this and criticism, a lot of people will, to play devil's advocate, say, why haven't you brought this to the mainstream media? Why haven't you been able to get any of this material on a documentary on History Channel or Discovery or something like that? And I think that's a valid question, Renee.
Yeah, and why isn't, with Gerald Anderson being the last living admitted witness? I mean, there are probably some guys in their 90s now who were young soldiers in the Army at the time that Gerald was 5, and they're probably either senile, sick, or their Social Security pension checks from the military, depend on their silence. But Gerald doesn't get that kind of a check from the government, and he was 5 years old at the time, and he's 75 now, and he still has his smarts. Why aren't they knocking down his door to get his testimony and to open up the case? It's because there is a cover-up. Period. The end.
Not only that, but Hollywood, Dave, you put your finger on it at the start of the show. It's not a sexy story. In Roswell, you got lights in the sky. You got some guy with another guy's wife in a truck that saw it happen. You've got all these witnesses intimidated. You've got this good-looking rancher. You've got the sheriff involved. You've got all these death threats. You've got things disappearing, So you got all this sexy story. What do you have for the planes? Hey, dude, we found this piece of metal, and oh, by the way, all scientific tests we've run on it show that it's from an extraterrestrial craft. End of story. You have like a 15-second documentary. So, unless you want to go through all the backstory and how the guys found it and, that kind of thing. But like Dave said, it's not a sexy story. And I think that's why you don't have History Channel and Giorgio Tsoukalos and all those beating down the doors of the Art Campbells and the Chuck Wades of the world. And I think they're missing a great opportunity here. And talking to the Steve Colberns of the world.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, there's not a lot of backstory to it.
Do you think that they are ignoring this story on purpose, whether it's Ancient Aliens, whether it's, we know Stanton has interviewed about it and he has discussed it, but there's a lot of heavyweights out there that aren't even going near this story. Do you think that they've been wrongly influenced, or do you think that they are just out to lunch with the topic, Renee?
Both. I think that some of them have been threatened by government sources. Leave it alone. It doesn't exist. It was disproved in the 90s. And without further ado, they drop it, and they're still looking for the lights in the sky and the Phoenix lights and things that they can't deny. You couldn't deny the 5 guys in the truck with Travis Walton.
Right.
I mean, there's only one living witness to this right now, and several pieces of metal scattered around. And it's easy to disavow because there aren't the witnesses. There aren't the couples in the car. There wasn't a sheriff involved. So they can sweep it under the rug.
But this is what doesn't make sense to me. We know the government is going to sweep it under the rug, Ray. We know that they don't want anything to do with this. They have a tough time enough as it is with Roswell still being as popular as possible, and it seems like they've just given up on that one. But this one they have full control of. And it doesn't help the fact when the field of ufology continues to do the exact same thing and push this testing away and this site away, much like Renee has stated. Like, that makes no sense. What are we in for? Isn't this what we're supposed to do?
It is.
Unfortunately, the field of ufology has been infiltrated by those who would like to see it fail. They're operatives, and who they work for, I don't know. But if you look at past organizations, like the one Don Kehoe had and the APRO organization, they were all infiltrated by, believe it or not, benign retired people of the CIA. And eventually, all the retired CIA and FBI guys wound up on the board of directors of Kehoe's organization. And what did they do? They got rid of him because he was the only honest one of the bunch. And then the next thing you know, his organization goes defunct. So it's an infiltrate, and I'm seeing the same stuff here. For example, and I'm not going to name names again, but, you have a very reputable PhD that did the testing. You have somebody who's done scientific analysis, even if it was in the oil field, but somebody who's a scientist for 40 years and has done this kind of thing, and yet they didn't have to overkill the report, because their results that they published showed that it was terrestrial material. Yet they threw in all of this smoke about, the sample had dirt on it and other things that just didn't make sense in the context of, you already proved your point. Why did you throw this very suspicious phraseology about dirt on the metal? You didn't have to do it. So it seems like, the more we can obfuscate, the better, and so I see a lot of it, and that's just a singular case. I've seen respected researchers give a talk at a major conference, and I had a page and a half of notes for things that I know were blatantly false that were stated on that stage, or things I suspected were false, and I couldn't cross-examine a person in public because they filibustered to the 15-minute Q&A session they were supposed to leave. And I know these were false things, and I shake my head going, I worked on the base, you're talking about the base, You cannot fool me. So I know that there are people out there that are operatives of who I don't know, but they're definitely guilty of misinformation and intentional disinformation. And I see it all the time. So the government doesn't have to do anything because people are already working to destroy the UFO community, and I'm sure they've been at it for a long time, as evidenced by the things that happened to Keogh and the APRO Association.
Is that CIA, NSA, some sort of hidden black op? What is your take on it, Ray?
Well, just look at the people who were put on the board of directors of Keogh's organization. They were basically mostly retired intelligence agents. So that's a known fact. It's a provable fact. So, 2 + 2 in this case equals 4. And what happened? Keogh was ousted. He formed the organization. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what happened. What their motivation was, I don't know, but the fact that it happened is a well-documented fact. And is it happening again? Could it be happening to MUFON? The people I've talked to MUFON, like I briefed the North Carolina chapter, great people, love the director down there, exchange great information. I just briefed Michigan MUFON a week and a half ago. Love those folks. So it seems like on a local level, they're making progress. They're trying to, find a solution. They're out there doing the investigations. At the national level, maybe there's a movement afoot to maybe squash the organization from the top. I do not know, but I'm seeing some smoke out there, and I'm getting suspicious.
Renee, what are your thoughts on what Ray is saying in regards to where there's smoke, there's fire in regards to the cover-up?
Oh, there's no doubt. I mean, I'm just a little old grandma from Deming, New Mexico, but I'm not a stoop. And you begin to connect the dots, and then you go to the meetings, and then just my dealings with several of the people through MUFON, and they're perfectly polite, but it's just, cut through the crap here, kids. Come on, let's put our big boy pants on, and let's attack this from a scientific standpoint, and let's move forward with this. You can interview so many people so often, but you've got to get down to the brass tacks. You got to get past the bureaucracy of the baloney and the crapola, and and everybody's got to be on the same page. That's the problem. Not everybody's on the same page. And if the government, which has the money and the power, doesn't want to have disclosure, it ain't going to happen. They'll do anything and everything to delay. It's like MUFON completely delayed their analysis. I had started one September of 2013, and making all the contacts on behalf of the guys, and it was September 14th, one full frigging year, 1 year, 365 days before we had the conference call with the shoddy results. And all you'd have to do is just, they have the contacts, but they don't want to use them. And I think they figured we're a bunch of amateurs. I mean, okay, I'm an amateur, but I'm not a dumb amateur, okay? And then you had, Chuck Wade. I guess they thought he was an amateur, and Art Campbell, older men that they figured they could just blow off with their delays. And people do get discouraged when there are delays in the process, and they begin to kind of like fall off the train. So we hung in, and I pushed, and I sent emails, and finally we got it, and it was just so incredibly disappointing because it just was a shoddy analysis, and it was deliberate. There's no doubt about it. No doubt about it. I mean, I can't put my finger on it, but it's like you have mother's instinct about these things. When your baby is purposely being set aside. And it was very discouraging, and it's interesting now, almost 2 years after you initially interviewed me, to be back talking about this again. But I'm not hopeful that anything's going to come of this. I mean, because who is going to offer to do the secondary analysis? Despite, and I've heard random things, how much it's going to cost to analyze and to do it comprehensively. It has to be a comprehensive analysis. It can't just be a surface thing. I mean, Steve will tell you you're going to have an electron microscope. I mean, it's not a simple thing. And then who's going to publish the results? It's okay, the scientific community might come up with the conclusion that it's, off-planet material, but what are they going to do with it? Are they going to be able to get the government? And
I'm here to tell you
maybe,
that the minute you mention UFOs or aliens, no scientific publication in the country will touch it.
Yeah, they're afraid because of funding and government contracts they might have. I mean, it's a spider's web of deception, intrigue. Talk about material for a wonderful movie or something. This is it, This has the makings of everything that is just, it's got romance, it's got interesting people, it's got history, it's got a subject that's out of this world, literally and figuratively, and I just can't believe it. Part of this is what's made me a little bit more cynical than I was just 5 years ago. I kind of lost faith in the good Boy Scout values, Where have they gone? What happened to America apple pie, motherhood and the American way? Where's Superman when we need him?
He's Canadian, I hate to tell you.
We lost our compass. Superman is Canadian, okay.
Well, he was drawn by a Canadian. I just had to throw that in there. We only got about
probably with my emotional overreaction to all this, anybody who is part of the cover-up, part of the government black ops, whatever group is controlling and pulling the strings, they're probably laughing up their sleeve at me. And you know what? I'm going to be like Trump. I don't care. I know what's right, and I'm going to do what's right. And I just hope there's somebody out there with power that has the same attitude.
Steve, I want to get you in here for a moment, if you don't mind, because we only got about 6.5 minutes left. Yeah, this show has flown by. Is this case of San Augustin, is this a precedent center, or do we know of any other crash sites around North America, maybe the world, that this same type of inaction or ineptitude has taken place?
I would have to say it's a precedent setter only because there's no other sites that we've found this amount of material at. But there are other crash sites, but the government has done a much better job of keeping them secret, and we have no material from them to test. So I would have to say that on that basis, this is a precedent setter. But yes and no, it's not really a precedent setter in that we know it's happened before, we just can't prove it.
Do you think there's any other cases similar to this if we just stick in North America? Could you say Kecksburg?
Yeah. Kecksburg, Kingman, Arizona, Aztec, New Mexico, several others. There was a crash in Mexico back in the 80s. I forget exactly where it was, but they called it Mexico's Roswell.
But do they have material proof?
No, that's what I was saying. Other than imprints in the ground. We know there have been other crashes, but this is a precedent setter in that they've tried to cover it up, and we also have proof that it occurred and material from it.
It took years of detective work by the Art Campbells and the Chuck Wades of the world in order to discover the site, to bring Gerald Anderson in there to show him, oh, you're only 100 yards off. So, this was the perfect storm of the perfect people to put together to uncover it. And I don't know if you have that perfect group of people with, enough clues like Art and Chuck and everyone had, and their own Gerald Anderson to make this kind of discovery. So I think, for me, this is like a one-in-the-world kind of opportunity here and a discovery, one-in-the-world kind of discovery for the civilians of the world.
And unless there's maybe a crash site that just hasn't been discovered that was before radar, maybe in the jungles or the high mountains of Canada going into Alaska, where it's so remote that you're not going to send people, even airplanes, into that area. Maybe it's under a glacier or something along those lines. That's the only way we're going to get another opportunity at something like this, especially today with all of the technology out there. Would you agree, Ray?
Yeah, and this one has a living eyewitness still, which is something that you're not going to find. If it's in the jungle, they're dispersed, they see it at a distance. This is somebody who saw it, touched it, was within, inches, millimeters of it. So that's what makes it unique. And then you just had this group that came along that had this vision and had all these clues and did their research. And one's a history professor. He knew how to piece together the story. So very unique. I think, time is now. Maybe we need to do one of those fund me sites where we put up the story and we go, hey, I know this isn't, some crippled kid or, we're not trying to cure cancer here, but all we need is a couple $1,000 and we could change the history of this planet. So I can't imagine we would fail if we would set up a site like that and got some public funds going.
Renee, 30 seconds for your final words.
I don't have any final words. I've pretty much said everything. I know it's real. Gerald Anderson is real. And I think for history's sake, if we don't grab onto this within the next 6 months to a year, it'll be gone. It's now or never.
Steve, would you agree with those thoughts in your final words?
Yeah, I think that more attention ought to be given to this, and this is a real UFO crash site, in my opinion. And my other final words are: if anybody out there has physical evidence or a sighting, don't trust MUFON. Trust independent researchers like myself.
And Ray?
I'm trying to stay neutral. I don't really have a dog in this fight. I don't have the emotional ties like Renee does. I don't have the technical expertise like Steve does. But I'm a really good judge of, I would put a lot of people in the room at the same time. I let them tell their stories, and that's what I've been doing on this case. And when I compare the stories, they're just not matching up. So I still want to do a little bit more investigation, but, I have to lean with the Steve Colberns of the world and the Renee Carkins of the world saying, I think they're the ones on the right track, and they're the ones actually putting most of the truth out there. So, it's a TBD for me, but I like what I'm seeing out of Steve's camp and his work.
Thank you, Ray.
Absolutely. And until the mystery is solved, we continue spinning our wheels, don't we?
Oh, that's a good way of putting it, spinning our wheels. Mm-hmm. Dave, thank you again for this second chance to talk about
No problem. No problem. And I want to say thank you to you, Renee, for hopping on late. Ray Szymanski, man of clear vision here, my friend. Man of clear vision. And Steve, it was an absolute pleasure getting you on Spaced Out Radio for the first time. It was amazing, some of the things that you said. I just want to say thank you so much on behalf of my audience and doing this. And you know what? I'm going to get you guys to hold on for 1 second because I'm going to close this thing out. If you're listening in on the SOR side, you are hearing Mr. Ron Bumblefoot THAL, formerly of Guns N' Roses. He has taken us in and brings us out of every single show. Here on Spaced Out Radio, he is the official guitar god of the mighty SOR. Now, reminder to you, there is no show tomorrow night with Uncle Jimbo James Tyson. He'll be on an investigation with me. Yes, we're going to play with ghosts tomorrow night at a charity event in the sticks around my place. Try and raise some money for a good cause, and the community seems to be accepting of it, which is going to be a lot of fun. Cannot wait. I will be back on Monday night, Chronicles of the Unknown. We talk paranormal, our roundtable tonight, or on Monday night. It's going to be a lot of fun. Remember, you can tune this show in and catch any others on iTunes. Just download it if you have an iTunes account. If you don't, go to TuneIn. You can hear them there, or on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. Literally, the archives hit in about 2 minutes. It'll be really, really quick. You can listen to them there for free. Also, remember, if you want any other information, go to spacedoutradio.com. We do this thing 7 days a week. Why? It's not because we're crazy. It's not because we're enjoying it, even though we are. We're doing this because we want to get bigger. We want to get better. We've cracked 21,500 listeners per night. I want 25. I can do that by each and every one of you telling a friend, sharing our posts on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Tumblr, whatever else is out there. Let's just get to it. Let's make this one big happy family. I'm gone. My bag is packed. I'm going off into the wilderness to find my Zen, my Chi, and maybe a nice Sasquatch cave with some Wi-Fi so I can keep in touch with all of you this weekend. You have a good one, everyone. Much love. Talk to you on Monday night. Stay safe this weekend. And if you're playing with ghosts, just tell them Dave said hi.